I believe we are almost live, if not live already. I just walked in the door a few seconds ago, so this
You're
was
doing a beauty job.
perfect timing. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Rise of the Expert. This is part 4, going along with Dwayne's series of articles that he's put out, and he just released the 4th one, and that's Christian Dispensationalism and the Social Gospel. And we're going to really dig in. I know last week we mentioned getting into law, but we're not there quite yet. We will be there very soon.
Yeah.
But we need to do this first, and this is going to be a juicy one. Going to dig into basically the roots of fundamentalist Christianity in this country,
Yep.
and a whole lot more. And yeah, Dwayne, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great.
It's
Just
good to
working our
hear.
butts off over here, trying to get things done. And you know how it is. You're a busy guy too, but a couple
Absolutely.
minutes late today, but we're good. We're here. So
Yeah,
nothing
not
to
too
complain
bad.
about. Are we
And you
live?
just we are live.
Nice.
And
Nice.
you just recently did an epic, like, 3-hour podcast with the missing link, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
And so we just basically caught everybody up, all of his viewers, his listeners, his
Hmm.
crowd. We just got them all sort of caught up on what you and I have been going through. So we just kind of covered the first 3 articles, and then we
Excellent.
rebooked for another month from now. So we should be able to get through 4 weeks here. And that will include the probably a two-parter on sociological jurisprudence, and then it lines up right. So I should be able to do that again with him on the missing link. And yeah, that was really a great time. I like being on there. I love having people ask questions and participating. So
Heck yeah, man. And that's what we hope for today as well.
mhm.
So I see we got a couple people watching right now. Thank you for
Nice.
being here.
Cool. Cool.
And yeah, let's dig right in, Dwayne. We
Mhm.
left off with well, we've set quite a bit of foundational information up for everybody, and we're really digging into how Brandeis has single-handedly, like, puppeteered this entire movement, this entire situation. It's very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. He's really central in all of this. And so when I started writing this months and months ago, and we were supposed to do a Rise of the Expert, you can see now why it took so long is because every time I opened a door, there was all kinds of information that was
Hmm.
pertinent
Hmm.
to the whole story, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so today will be a great example of, you know, me having to cut off this research because there is so much here when it comes to Christian dispensationalism,
Hmm.
Brandeis' involvement in this evangelization of end times and this, fomenting of fear. And so somewhere along the way, I want to talk about that. So if anybody's got any questions about that or any comments about how most narratives that we see out there are fear-based, and it's a parallel whether we're talking Christianity or conspiracy theorism,
Hmm.
you know, it seems to be a common theme throughout even alternative media and independent media. So I'm hoping now through this, we're going to start making connections between socialism and this Christian dispensationalism. It's really Christian social activism is what they're
Hmm.
doing, and they're through their works they are actually attempting to bring heaven on earth. So it's very similar to other patterns that we're seeing coming out of other different groups. And what's interesting about this is these guys are all Bachelor of Arts, Master of Arts too. So they got the same education, except they've got PhDs in divinity. So they're all based out of Princeton and Harvard and all of these same places, except they're religious, and they're
Hmm.
coming at this from a religious aspect. So there's a couple different groups that we're going to get into. And so we start with William Eugene Blackstone. He is really considered the father of Zionism because of his 1891 Blackstone petition. And so it antedates Theodor Herzl, his Der Judenstaat, and his involvement with Zionism. So
Hmm.
really what we see is that Christian dispensationalists are the founders of Zionism. And
Very
so
interesting.
one of the connections that we're going to make here is between Christianity and socialism. And when you think about it, it's very similar in their methods and their goals, right? To take care of, equity, equality of outcome, right? Taking care of the poor and needy. These are very similar ideas. These are, so how different is it, you know, that, the religious type promising, heaven on earth, or the socialists promising utopian um, society, and it
Hmm.
all lines up as you see. So this quote is kind of just sort of orientating us correctly. Socialism offered not only a radical critique of American political and economic institutions, it also offered the seal, symbols, and sense of participation in a world transforming cause often associated with Christianity itself. Okay, and so that's actually identifying the social gospel movement, which is the second group of people that we're going to get into. But they're all related underneath Christian fundamentalism. Okay, so this is all a giant movement. And it's all concerned with, guess what? Capital and labor and all
Right.
of the issues that are coming out of industrialization. Okay, just like the socialists are looking at the world, these guys are looking at the world the same. So Blackstone was a very well-known evangelical minister of his day, considered today a founder of dispensationalism, along with John Nelson Darby and the Plymouth Brethren in the mid-1800s. Other key names in the foundation of dispensationalism in America are James Inglis, James Hall Brooks, C.I. Scofield, and Dwight L. Moody. Christian dispensationalists interpret the Bible literally, believing in an approaching cataclysmic event as described in the book of Revelations.
And that's the defining characteristic here.
Yes.
This is what they're mainly pushing. This is the thing we're highlighting most, right, Dwayne?
Yep.
That they're
And
pushing the end times.
yep. And support for Israel. That is actually
Yes.
the predominant underlying current in all of it
I would say
throughout.
one along with the other,
Yep. Yep.
this, as long as this, in a way, it was like, this is this is something that God wants and needs in order for this to all come to fruition.
Yep. So from out of this group is where they popularized a fear of the future found in the biblical stories of the tribulation, the rapture, millennialism, otherwise known as the second coming of Christ. It's dispensationalism is a storyline. It's telling history through a storyline, a sequential time thing that we'll get into. So the movement has also greatly assisted in the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, and that it is primarily centered around the return of God's chosen people to Israel. This is one of the messages I'm reading in all of these guys' literature. This is really what they're talking about primarily. So these concepts, much to our surprise, weren't established tens of thousands of years ago, but a little more than 100 years before I was born. So these men
This
were
is so
instrumental,
weird to
right?
think that
Christian,
it's that recent, at least these
the recency of it
interpretations.
all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'd
And
think that this is all so old, but it's like peer review and vaccines and all of these things created in the 60s. We thought it was like
right
600 years old.
now,
No,
let me
they're
ask
newly established.
I need to ask a dumb question here.
Sure.
Actually, you know what? I forgot my question, so I'll hold off on it for now. But it will be
Okay.
coming about this. Oh, yeah, I found it again. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about atheism in the past here, like the idea of a secular people and secular academics being really
Mm-hmm.
central to the plot that we've been uncovering.
Yep.
But it seems that this is a totally opposing angle, and I'm just wondering, is this like a dialectic of sorts? Is it just like what
What
is it?
you
What are we?
mean? You mean
We're seeing
secular versus religious?
Well, right. I mean, that's kind of what I'm getting at because, like, we have a lot of the people that we've been covering previously are Jewish, but also secular and not necessarily
Yeah.
Jewish by faith, more Jewish by whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
But like, we're talking about academics, we're talking about, I don't know, maybe I have it wrong, but
Yep.
I feel like
Well,
we've been seeing a lot of like secular people involved in this, and now we're seeing the opposite, which is
yep.
it's good that we're seeing the full spectrum of who it is, and we're not just being biased and saying, "Oh, it's all these atheist Satanists," and you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Well, it's a journey to the truth. So we don't really care what their ethnic backgrounds are. We're just more concerned with their level of complicity, and their involvement, and whether they're guilty of doing things that are harmful to humanity. And
Oh,
throughout this,
absolutely.
that
And
you
you're
know,
doing a fantastic job of uncovering that
yeah,
particular angle. I was just curious merely about the very specific difference between secular and
right,
faith-based thinking in
yeah,
how it affects society and all blah
okay,
blah blah, and
yep,
the fact that we have both sets of characters
yes.
involved is interesting
So
to me. That's all.
right. So then let's remember that their game plan is to infiltrate all aspects of society. And one of those major forms, when you talk about the moorings and the traditions and values that we have, we all know that religion is either number one or two, right? As far as having us cling to values and to keep us on the straight and narrow, religion is one of those things that they recognize they had to remove us from to get us to go in another direction, right? This is progressivism. They're always going to be moving us forward. And just like they looked at the US Constitution as an obstacle, I think that they were looking at the Bible as an obstacle too. And
Yeah, it
so
seems that
this
way.
this is how they infiltrated religion. That's what we're going to show here. And
Right.
so say it's very similar. We have a group of intelligent creatives, a group of people with some technology, and then they're being influenced and, you know, coerced and directed, really.
Right.
So you'll see a lot of similarities, and it's really bringing them together in the middle rather than being opposed.
Gotcha. Okay.
So Dwight Lyman Moody, he's like he's like the most popular evangelical of the day, but he's considered the predecessor to televangelism. So like Billy Graham, Jimmy Swaggart, Jerry Falwell, Jim Baker, and Joel Osteen, Oral Roberts, they all they all push the same narrative. They're all supporting Israel, like we said, and pushing end time narrative. This is really, I think, how they make money. But you can see that this is going on still to this day because these guys are connected through what is called the gap theory, and we'll get into that. But there's connections through their belief systems and the different denominations, and so you start to see similar groups of people believing in similar things.
Okay.
And so out of this Dwight Lyman Moody, not only comes the televangelism that we see still today so prominent, but the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago is the inspired model for most of all of the Bible colleges that spread around America at that time, forming a network and helping propagate faith in a literal translation of the Bible. So
This is unreal.
these men all having one thing in common even today, in that they all preach end times through a literal translation of the Bible and support the followers of Judaism as God's chosen people and support emphatically their right to a homeland in Palestine. So John Nelson Darby, he's considered the father of dispensationalism. He's born about 40 years before everybody. Um, and futurism as well, and premillennial tribulation rapture. So this is all underneath the heading of dispensationalism. Darby was a pioneer within the Plymouth Brethren and founder of the Exclusive Brethren. This is just another group of people that comes from Ireland. So it's very religious. These guys are mostly Presbyterian or Baptist too. You'll start to see that they come from there. Evangelical, right? But underneath evangelical, you can have baptism or
Oh yeah. A lot of different.
Presbyterianism, right? It's more about the spreading of the word of God. So when you hear those kinds of phrases, that is somebody under the spell of dispensationalism.
Right. I mean, the literal definition is pretty close. Just like this, like a historical progression revealed in the
Yes.
Bible,
Yep.
basically.
Good use of the word progression too, because this is how they use it.
Ah, there we go.
Yep. So uh, Darby promoted sola scriptura, common to nearly all Protestant denominations, believing the word of the Bible or the word of God as the one true infallible authority. So Darby's eschatology was then popularized through the publication of the Scofield Reference Bible in 1909. Today, thanks to Darby and C.I. Scofield, we have well over 100 million American Christians interpreting the Bible literally, fearing the future, and believing it's all in God's hands. Now, I would say it's well more than 100 million at this point around the world of people that believe in end times, and you don't even have to be Christian anymore to believe that.
No, I was just actually thinking while you were talking about this that, Madame Blavatsky and Theosophy and
Yes.
spiritualism was going on at this exact same time. So it's
Yep.
like two sides to the same coin because, of
Mhm.
course, they don't twist it the same way Christianity or Judaism does, but it's still, I mean, we could go on. It's a totally different thread about how
Mhm.
the New Age has been doing the same exact thing
Correct.
and just
Yeah.
leading the opposite flock towards this same center.
Yeah, seemingly disparate groups of people are all coordinated doing the same things, saying the same things, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Inspired by the same things. So James H. Brooks studied briefly at the Princeton Seminary before moving to Miami University at Oxford, Ohio. He was the driving force behind the Niagara Bible conferences that introduced Protestants from all over the world fundamental ideas of dispensationalism, including the restoration of Israel and a distinction between the saved and the damned. So when you hear people say you better get with the Bible or you're not going to be saved, that is a literal translation of the Bible. So Cyrus Ingersoll Schofield is pretty famous today because he put out his own uh, reference Bible. So he was a
Right.
Southern Presbyterian and very influential author of the first modern Bible with chain references, is what they call it. So this is the first Bible since there was one in the 1500s before the King James Bible.
Mm-hmm.
That was the only other one that sort of had chain references, but the Scofield Reference or Study Bible uh, has chain references. So it's like a scientific approach to the story of God. So here we're starting to see the scientific expert
Oh yeah.
getting involved in religion. So
Oh
published in 1909, the same year. Okay, this is very interesting to note too, that the Scofield Bible comes out in the exact same year Herbert Crowley's Promise of American Life. So now here's a great opportunity to look at the two different groups here we've been talking about, the secular and the religious. And
yeah.
basically, it's the same idea coming out of here. The Scofield Reference Bible targeted at Christians, saying, here's the life that you should be leading, and here's how you should be interpreting the Bible and living your life through God. And then Herbert Crowley's Promise of American Life is very much similar to message to the secular. Here's a
Mm-hmm.
new way of life that we're going to impose. And this is a progressive message because Herbert Crowley's a founding father and inspiration to Theodore Roosevelt. This book, Promise of American Life, inspires Theodore Roosevelt to create the Bull Moose Party, the first progressive party. So, same year.
It's all tied together.
It is very tied together. So, it was the first definitive scientific interpretation of the Word of God, complete with commentary and explanatory notes written in the margins by Scofield and his team of consulting editors. And I've left
That's
the names
crazy.
there.
You literally have the gatekeepers just putting notes in the fucking
Yeah.
sidelines.
And so
That's awesome. That's so
my
easy.
wife,
Jeez.
my wife got me the Scofield Bible. It's like the 100th year anniversary. And we're going to
Mm-hmm.
recite some of it because it's incredible when you start to understand how it happened. But it's right here. So nearing the end of the show, I'd like to go through that and just read some of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can definitely do that.
I've never
This Bible
recited from the
blows
Bible
me
before
away.
in my life.
It's
We're
so
going to be
crazy how
fine.
you mentioned the scientific expert here in this context.
Yeah,
I love
that's
how
what
this
this
is
is.
coming together because
Yeah,
it took my mind as far away, but on point, as like looking at all the fantastical sci-fi that has always been in our lives. Now there has to be like perfect scientific explanations for how rational all of it is in all the Marvel movies and the DC movies.
right,
All of our superheroes now have to have scientific explanations for
right.
why they are the way they are.
Yeah,
Everything is being brought that direction. It's
yeah.
crazy.
And so just like the labor union in part two is the scientific expert entering wedge between our labor, here it is between our source again, what our
Yeah.
source of spirituality
Yeah, like we can
for a
explain
lot
this
of
for you.
people.
Don't you worry. You hold that thought. We got you covered.
Right. So in 1917, it was revised by Scofield in an attempt to attribute exact dates to biblical verse. So, I'll hold my personal views. But you can imagine what they would be, me being a forensic historian and always on the search for truth and um, objective truth. So this edition of the Bible had its origin in the increasing conviction of the editor through 30 years of study and use of the scriptures as pastor, teacher, writer, and lecturer upon biblical themes that all of the many excellent and useful editions of the Word of God left much to be desired. So that's Scofield talking in the introduction to the Scofield Bible. And he's saying that, there's so many different stories about not just creation, but the story of God, that this is what has inspired him to create a version with footnotes, citations. So Scofield's version containing the entire text of the King James Version. So they took the text out of the King James Version and then just started putting his own interpretations in there in the margins. Okay. This is one thing I had to figure out. I was like, is this a total retelling of everything? But no, they've just taken the text from King James Version, put it in there, and then added all kinds of notes, man. Actually, there's more notes per page than there are biblical verse.
Man, I'd be really interested in the aiming and direction of those notes and
Yeah,
where
well,
it
we're going to
leads the
talk about
reader.
that because it's very subtle and it's in the words that they change. It's like one word changes everything. So, um, where was I? Yeah, originally published in 1611 was the King James Version. It becomes the modern day theological entering wedge, acting as the ultimate authority, impressing both a sense of fear of the future and a state of helplessness into its hundreds of millions of followers. Scofield, an early proponent of gap theory and progressive creationism, something I just discovered today, I think, progressive creationism.
That's a
The
weird one.
belief in a gradual unfolding of life as determined by God, a recognition of intelligent design, and gap theory, a new beginning put between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. Gap theory, as advocated by Scofield, expands biblical history to millions of years rather than the previously taught thousands of years. A theistic evolution is the word that they use, opening the door to Darwinism. So when you open the Bible, the first sentence, if you just give me a moment here, I'm going to read it because
Sure.
we're just going to
Hell yeah.
keep people going here.
No, this is important. I think reading from the source is very important. The audience
Yeah, and
thinks so too.
he talks about the Pentateuch. Do you know what that is?
I've heard that word. I think we talked about it in the chat, you, me, and Andy. But shout out to Andy. He couldn't be here this week. Hopefully, he
Yeah,
gets to listen in a little bit. By the way, and shout out to everybody who's watching right now. Appreciate you being here. Mario Garza from Symbolic Studies. What's up, brother?
nice.
Thanks for being here.
So the Pentateuch is actually the Talmud.
Huh.
And so Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Okay, that's it. It does say here, earth made waste and empty by judgment. So with a slight alteration of the wording here, we see that earth made waste and empty by judgment. So what they've done here is created two um, two cataclysms, two judgment days, and in between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. So the very first two sentences of the Bible, they input their entering wedge idea of, two judgment days. And
Hmm.
so I wish I could show this to you. I wanted to include it in the article, but I ran out of time, and there's, you can't put everything in there.
Yeah, exactly.
So after Genesis verse 2, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, we see written the new beginning, the first day, light diffused. So they've gone from a judgment day from Genesis 1:1 to 1:2, but in between they've infused another judgment day. This is where apparently Satan, the devil, um, appears. So that's the extent to my knowledge of this situation. I was diving into it today and learning about gap theory so I could properly explain it to a
Hmm.
point. Now, so all the general consensus or the summation here is that they extended the time period from, we all know that Christians believe that the world's only 10,000 years old. Well,
Hmm.
by inputting a second judgment day, they actually were allowed then to expand the whole timeline into millions of years. And what this is opening the door to the idea of evolution and Darwinism. So they've just kind of stepped a half step or one step towards Darwinism by even accepting the idea of evolution. Now, evolution to them and to Scofield meant that uh, growths and evolution in our human knowledge happened in quick spurts rather than over a long, slow period like Darwinism. But
Hmm.
they still are talking about evolution as opposed to let there be light.
Right.
So it's probably a long and convoluted explanation.
No,
And
it's something that we kind of have to slowly unravel through more examples, you know what I mean, as we
right.
get further into this, because
Yeah.
it is
So
a
just,
it's a tricky it's this is a very subversive thing that they've done, and it
yeah.
tricked millions of people. So it's not you're not no one's going to get it on the first try here. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
when you were uncovering this and you were telling me and Andy about it when we were in our private chats, you were like Newton with like an apple falling on his head or something. Like you were losing your shit about the Scofield Bible when it first hit you,
Mm-hmm.
because of all this, because
Yeah.
it comes in waves in a way.
Yeah. And it's been pretty intense the last couple of days again, just, seeing the patterns and seeing the same things happening in all aspects of our lives. They're just using the same techniques and same program.
Right.
So the Bible is a progressive unfolding of truth. This is from the introduction um, of the Scofield Bible, and the emphasis there was not added. Okay, so they italicized the word progressive.
Of
That was
course.
their intent to put that there. So you can see them coming together with the progressive era movement of social reform, um, and they're all trying to, create social stability and find a model upon which society, can rid itself of all evil, really.
Right.
Whether you want to talk the socialists or the Christians, this is how they talk. And so this um, also one of the things that I recognize here is that things are evil and there's evil in the world. And so just by having evil in the world, that means that we have to now take action. So it's much like how, you know, declaring war or being in war times, you're allowed to actually get away with a lot more than you would in times of peace. It's this sort of same idea.
Yeah.
So on page 2 of the 100th anniversary edition of the 1917 Scofield Bible, Scofield states that the Pentateuch, otherwise known as the Torah, I might have said Talmud,
Yeah,
tells
you did.
undeniably the order of the experience of the people of God in all ages. So he's saying the word that comes out of the Torah is infallible, a revelation of the true history, in fact. And such a history we find in words of matchless grandeur and in an order which, rightly understood, is absolutely scientific. And that one I added the emphasis because
Yeah,
he's
you had
using the
to.
word scientific, right? So, we've always known, or at least, I grew up in a world where science and religion were generally opposed to each other. But we start
Yeah.
to see that through their language, we start to see a crossover of things. Christian socialism, right? What did I say earlier today? Sociological evangelicalism. They're
Right.
using these words and they're just crossovers. They're just using their own language to explain the same things.
And honestly, there on another side of this, there is a number of reasons why science and faith and things like that can come together, but all of this has been manufactured.
Mm-hmm.
This is similar to what I've recently found out. Diving into David Icke's past, there is a guy who was exposing a lot of his influences, talking about theosophy and theosophy's influence on the entire New Age look at Jesus and the pagan gods, and how Horus had all these similarities to Jesus, when in reality these were written in by people like Crowley and others,
Yeah.
not necessarily literal.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a whole other aspect that's related to all of this too.
Right, yeah.
You know, Crowley's involvement in all of this is key to understand too. We just haven't gone down that road yet, but I can
Right, we're
already
going to be
see
doing, yeah, we're going to have to do other series,
for sure.
you know, going into different areas of
Yeah.
this, because again, they've captured all of society, all
Yeah.
avenues.
If you think about all the different personalities in this world, they just found all of the different things that appealed to everybody and started to infiltrate them in the same way.
It's so nuts. It seems so insane. It seems so far out until you start digging into the forensics
Yes.
of it all, as you have.
Yeah. And it becomes very real. So one further note here is that we said earlier that Scofield was a Southern Presbyterian, and Woodrow Wilson's father created the Southern Presbyterian Church and served as its leader for nearly 40 years. He was central in organizing the breakup of the Presbyterian Church into a North and South. Ruggles. So uh, Woodrow Wilson's dad's name is Joseph Ruggles
Right.
Wilson. And so nobody talks about him. But I went back and looked into him because it seemed like he had a significant role in, Woodrow Wilson's upbringing. And certainly he does. And we start to see that this pattern, there's actually not very many men in this story of the early 1900s that don't have very influential fathers doing the very same thing the generation earlier. And after these guys, their children too. And we're going to show you at the end of this show where Louis Brandeis's children are today, and it'll just blow your mind. And what they're
Right.
doing and what their interests are and the words that they're using. It's incredible. So
What
also
parts
in
of
1909,
society are they influencing?
pardon?
Sorry, what parts of society they're influencing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the exact same ones. So also in 1909, Harvard University President Eliot lectures to the Harvard Summer School of Theology and speaks repeatedly of a new Bible, resulting from historical study of its books in the light of recent researches and of new knowledge of the development of the world and mankind. Eliot stated the importance of this new religion in outlining the intellectual progress of the last century. So I've included that there on the left-hand side under Scofield. It's the Congregationalist and Christian World event and comment. So I've underlined some of those key sentences in there. So here we see there's no other Bible that this guy can be talking about. We know that Eliot is totally connected through Phi Beta Kappa to all of these same people. And here he is talking to a summer school seminary on Harvard campus about a new religion from a new scientifically based Bible.
This is so nuts.
So you start to, I mean, you got presidents from Ivy League universities now behind this too, supporting it, embracing it, pushing it along. And the Scofield Bible is published by Oxford Press too. So, they're advocates also of gap theory. They all want to extend the idea of history in the minds of Christians so that they can then try to get them wrapping their heads around evolution eventually.
You
Because,
mentioned also and I didn't ask you about it, but you mentioned putting like Satan being brought into the situation.
yep, yep, that's what they believe. And he's inserted between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. So I encourage everybody to go onto YouTube. There's a few really good videos out there on the gap theory. And
Okay.
so we're not going to get into it too deep because I really don't
No,
know
that's
it well
okay.
enough to
Just
explain it
to
well enough.
just to put a
Okay.
point on it,
Yep.
you're basically showing this is the evidence for how there's a it's quite well, no pun intended. There's a gap between the actual Bible and what these words like devil, Satan, Lucifer, all these distinctions are, versus what they've kind of done and have literally put like this big enemy figure in a more fundamentalist kind of way. Or I'm
I would
I'm a
say that
little
it's a dialectic. You know,
okay. Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like there
Hmm.
wasn't a second judgment day, but they changed the Genesis 1:2 to be in the past tense. They changed the tense of it so that to read that is implied that there was already one judgment. And now
Right.
this is where Satan came alive and um, started, doing what he does.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
and
Yeah.
so then there's a second judgment day. And so at this point, I just encourage everybody to go look into gap theory. It'll blow your mind, but it's a key thing to understand here is that they're manipulating the the whole concept of the Bible if they're affecting the timeline of it all and
Hmm.
stretching it out into millions of years rather than thousands, just by
Yeah.
subtle little changes in the language.
Very
So
interesting.
the religion of a multitude of humane persons in the 20th century may therefore be called without inexcusable exaggeration a new religion. Not that a single one of its doctrines and practices is really new in essence, but only that the wider acceptance and better actual application of truths familiar in the past at many times and places, but never taken to heart by the multitude or put in force on a large scale, are new. So they're basically saying there that the ideas of the Bible obviously are, thousands of years old. They've been reading these verses out of the Bible because it's King James Bible. It's, published 400 years ago,
Right.
500 years ago. But to disseminate it on a large scale and to popularize it is new. And that's President Elliott from his speech. So today, dispensationalism is morphed into a progressive dispensationalism that differs slightly from the classic dispensationalists, although the main adherents, they all still widely share include a separation between church and Israel, a future pre-tribulation rapture, a 7-year tribulation, and an eventual millennial kingdom in which peace resides for 1,000 years. So that's sounding very much like the vision promised by utopian ethical socialists and almost verbatim to Marx's own theory of our future.
Yeah.
Right? This is what he says, that there's going to be a revolution, there's going to be cataclysmic stuff go on, and then there's going to be a time of peace after that. So it's basically just saying the same thing.
It's basically what conspiracy theorists generally suggest that the Book of Revelations is being manufactured in front of our eyes to appeal
Yeah,
one
that's
way or the
exactly
other,
what it is.
to rope people in, to scare
Yep.
people, all of the above.
And they're doing it, synthetically. This is all man-made, and then they're trying to pass it off as divine, right? And so they're saying the same thing here. It's through their works that they are going to manifest the coming of Christ and this millennial era of peace. It has to be through their works. So they're actually motivating Christians to get active and to start pushing this too, not just to sit on their sit and do nothing.
Hmm.
So Blackstone wrote the very popular Jesus is Coming. This is where he really made his first money. Uh, God's Hope for a Restless World in 1878, and it became a sort of manifesto for all dispensationalist thought. The book was the movement's first bestseller, selling millions of copies over the next 50 years and has been translated into over 40 other languages. Jesus is Coming,
Jeez.
right?
Wow.
And so then Blackstone traveled to Palestine in 1890, 1891, and witnessed Leon Pinsker's new movement, a Rothschild sponsored development program of agricultural communities in Rishon LeZion and Nahalat Yehuda. It was during this visit, Blackstone had the idea of organizing the first conference between Christian and Jews. Historians regard the Conference of Christians and Jews on the past, present, and future of Israel to be the first interfaith conference between Christians and Jews held in the United States. So he's really bringing them together.
Which, I mean, yeah, it looks on the surface of things like, oh, that's great, putting
Yeah,
differences
it's just like,
aside. Yeah,
yeah, it's
it's
like
great.
everything else. It
Just
sounds
like
great.
this new religion that's being built in somewhere, I can't remember where, but they're building some massive, or they already built it, I think. It's like some massive building
A
that's,
Unitarian church, kind of.
is it kind of, but
Yeah.
it's way more New World Order-ish.
Like, yeah, like coexistence, right? Like the bumper sticker kind of.
Yeah, and I can't remember what it's called now, but maybe someone
It
out
is
there
built.
watching, yeah, it must
It
already be
has been
built.
built.
But this whole thing of all Western religions coming together, which I mean, it's so fucked up how they twist and just because in a way that's what it should be because it is all the same stories
Hmm.
mashed into one
Right.
direction or another,
Right.
absolutely, but the way they're going to hijack it and own it with their experts is the real problem.
Hmm. And so, you see Blackstone visiting Palestine, and I haven't been able to confirm that he met with Rothschild or he was working with him, but it states in the literature that he was there witnessing the work that was going on. And so that's what inspires him to come back home and bring Jews and Christians together and push for a Jewish homeland in support of um Jews. So I would say that he's in direct contact with Rothschild.
Yeah.
And then you look at Brandeis's involvement through the Palestine Economic Corporation and all of that. Well, yeah, we would see. And then, as I'm going to get to here in a moment, Blackstone and Brandeis are communicating big time. So in 1891, Blackstone famously published the Blackstone Memorial Petition in response to what he witnessed in Palestine. The petition was presented to US President Benjamin Harris in an effort to gain American support for the Jewish situation in Central Europe and to secure the holding at an early date of an international conference to consider the condition of the Israelites and their claims to Palestine as their ancient home. So he's pushing for international conference in which they can create Israel, and that's the Paris Peace Conference, 1919. That's where that all goes down.
Yep.
And he is a major player in all of it, as we will see in this next paragraph. This is a full 5 years before Theodor Herzl's Der Judenstaat and 6 years before Herzl's named president of the Zionist organization at the First Zionist Congress in Basel. So Harrison acknowledged Blackstone and the memorial, but chose not to involve himself. And there the petition remained until it was revived by Louis Brandeis in 1916. So introduced to the petition through his personal confidant, Nathan Strauss, Louis Brandeis would then formulate a plan to have the petition presented to Woodrow Wilson. It was adamant that he wasn't mentioned at all. So by influence, he wanted to influence Wilson uh, strictly by Blackstone and his appeals, rather than have Wilson know that it comes from Brandeis or that Brandeis was organizing it. He felt it would
Wow.
be more impact coming from another fellow Presbyterian, evangelical Christian.
Which he's got
Than
a point. It absolutely would,
Yep,
rather than a Frankist Jew.
right. And so Blackstone had sent letters to Wilson as early as 1914 asking for his assistance in the coming redemption of Israel. He attached a copy of Jesus is Coming. And then on November 10th of 1914, Wilson thanked Blackstone for his book through his personal secretary, Joseph Tumulty. And on April 5th, 16, Blackstone sent Wilson his brochure, The Times of the Gentiles and the War in the Light of Prophecy, in which he predicted a return of the Jews to Palestine in 1917 or 1918. And that's exactly what happens. 1917 is the Balfour Declaration.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've included the receipts there of the Balfour Declaration, or sorry, of the Blackstone petition. And so there's both the 1891 and the 1916 version.
Wow.
So you can zoom in on these things. I've got them as high resolution as I can so that, you know, you can actually zoom in and read them and see the quality.
Literal
And you'll see the
receipts,
names that are
ladies and
involved,
gentlemen.
the people that have signed on to this petition. They're big
This is
names.
unreal.
So
Yeah,
a
this
letter
has
from,
absolutely nothing to do with like disparaging a certain group of
nope,
like people's
no,
background you know, once you get into the details, this is what you find out that
yeah,
you know this is what needs to be uncovered here.
yeah.
This
And I
is
would say, you know,
unreal.
I've heard people say that about me, that I'm, you know,
Oh yeah,
centric on a particular type of people, but if you go look at my work, it's not true at all. We're just trying to
nope.
find the truth and where this new world order came from. And so we're identifying all types of people, everybody, really.
Yeah,
Everybody's
and let me,
involved.
and you know what? It really depends on how far back in time you're willing to look, and it takes a few thousand years to to start pointing a finger at someone else.
Mhm.
Like to be honest, like because it's just goes way way back
Yeah,
with not just you know, yeah, different
sure.
thread. Sorry.
And no, and that's what we're talking about, was that that's what we're showing. You know,
Hmm.
these are, you know, American evangelical Christians.
Right.
That's who is, you know, considered the father of Zionism. If you go and look deep enough to find the true source, it's going to be him, William Eugene Blackstone, who is a direct descendant of the first settler of Boston. So
Huh.
there's familial, you
Yeah,
know,
Blackstone. I
lineage,
live 15 minutes from Blackstone Valley.
right? And that's got to be named after him
It
and
makes
that
sense
family
now.
for sure,
Yeah, that's
for sure.
crazy,
And it's
dude.
Blackston. The first Blackstone that shows up as the first settler of Boston. It's Blackston, but it's the same family,
Blackstone.
Blaxton.
Interesting. And of
I've got
course, coming
provenance
from
proving that it's a direct descendant. So if anybody's got a problem with that, just come find
and,
me.
and these are old names too. These are names tied to duty, and
Right.
these are the
Yep.
oldest names we have in
Sure.
European history.
Yep. That's key to understand here, that this is all old school, you know, old
Hmm.
blood. This isn't just
Yes,
new. This
not
goes
even
back six,
close.
seven. Some of these guys, these ministers are, you know, sixth and seventh in line of former ministers of their family, right?
Hmm.
Uh, Lutheran back in the day, but then they start to turn into Baptists and Congregationalists
Right,
and, you know,
depending on the times.
Unitarians.
Right, exactly. Following that same path, yeah, to
Yeah,
coexist. Bumper stickers.
they're breaking away from the church, really,
Right.
one sort of step at a
Which I
time,
mean,
because
yeah, fuck
Lutheranism
the
was separate.
church. It's like again, we have to lay that out for people in some cases. You know, it's like yes, on one hand, the church is the old world order for sure,
Mhm.
but this is problem reaction solution. It's divide and
Yeah.
conquer. It's all of these things. You know,
Yeah, they're
there's a lot of different
inserting,
pieces.
this is good to know for today too, because they're inserting evil.
Hmm.
And then they're claiming that this world is evil, you know, much like they do today. I mean, without the thought of an evil world, how much would they get away with?
Right.
That's just a fresh thought of mine just in the last couple of days after this latest research. I'm
Absolutely.
starting to
And you
question
know,
even those kinds of things. How evil is really our world? Or are they
yeah.
fabricating all of that too?
That's something I ask myself often. I talk to my wife about that often. How much of the horrors and the awfulness. It's what Bill Hicks said so long ago too. You know, you look on your news and it says rape, death,
Yeah.
famine, murder, and you look out your window and it's just chirp, chirp, chirp,
Yeah,
chirp.
and they claim that they do so because it gets good ratings, but
Mm.
I don't think so. I think that, human nature at its very core is not meant to be
No, but we're broken.
evil.
So therefore these things do appeal to us. So it's like we're a
Right.
broke this is a different thread. You and me have to have a free for all episode
Yeah.
soon just
Okay.
so we can go back and forth for sure, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's it's we're a broken people because of what's
Yeah.
been done maybe naturally on some levels but also manufactured on other levels,
Yeah.
wars, things like that. But one way or the other, all this nefariousness does appeal to our lower natures that we are all being ruled by. And that's why it always comes back to our own responsibility, not only to
Yes.
do our own research, but to grow our own lives and grow our own selves and be, better ourselves away from
Yep.
who gives a fuck who gets into office or whatever.
Hmm.
None of them are coming to save you. None of it's coming to save
Hmm.
you. You're the only one that can really elevate yourself. And that may seem like a very godless take on it, but I don't mean it to be that way. Just
Yeah. Well, we got to be
the
careful nowadays in an information war where we pay attention,
where's
because
our attention
attention
being
is
paid?
everything. And if we are going to entertain the thought of overthrowing all of this, finally, it's going to be because we started paying it no attention and started building a beautiful argument against it.
Absolutely.
So that's what we try to do.
Cool.
So
Back on.
a letter from Nathan Strauss to WEB dated May 8th, 1916 reads, "It would have done your heart good to have heard Mr. Brandeis assert what a valuable contribution to the cause your document is. In fact, he agrees with me that you are the father of Zionism as your work antedates Herzl." So Wilson was presented with the 1916 Blackstone Memorial on May 5th, 1916. Attached was the original memorial with its 413 signatures. The petition is signed by John D. Rockefeller, William Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, Russell Sage, so that's Skull and Bones, Chauncey Depew, and nearly 400 others. There's all kinds of other names in there.
Wow.
And so Russell Sage makes an appearance here, starts funding these guys as books, just like they were funding the National Consumers League and the creation of the publication of Josephine Goldmark's book. So we talked last week
Right.
about
Yeah.
Brandeis working with the National Consumers League and changing legislation, and that was their main goal. Well, Russell Sage was funding all of that, and they're here again funding these guys, and I'll show you.
Very interesting.
So that might help you understand too, hey, how
Yeah.
they are going after every aspect, regardless of what people think. It's like, this movement against Hockey Canada here in Canada, follows similar lines in that they know that the one thing that galvanizes Canadians, brings us together, is hockey. And in a,
Fuck
in a
yeah.
very similar way, it's our religion. I mean, I see people wearing shirts that say hockey is Canada, Canada is hockey. I've worn one before too. We love our hockey here. It brings us all together. So what are they doing? They're attacking that institution. We see that happening
Absolutely.
presently right now. And the leadership of Hockey Canada has all been torn down and replaced. And so, that's an
Typical.
institution. That's a piece of Canadiana.
And that's why when I see that happening here in the States, to a number of different American institutions, ones that are, entertainment sake, whatever, it's like people act so surprised like they're going to be able to call them out on something. It's like, well, they want you to see this. They want you
Hmm.
to see it falling apart right in front of your eyes
Yeah.
because that's the whole point.
Yeah. And if we aren't sophisticated enough to know exactly what institutions and organizations need to be removed, we might just waste the whole system. And I see a lot of
Right.
people saying that, down with capitalism, down with the whole West. We got to start again when it's not like that. You know, it's it's mainly social science research institutions and applied science institutions that we should be removing from our society. Places like the New School
Yeah.
for Social Science, the University in Exile. These are major institutions in America now that really replaced old institutions that were far less harmful. And
Mhm.
now, it's basically Marxism normalized. So the principles laid out by Blackstone were remarkably similar to those of the Balfour Declaration and League of Nations mandate for Palestine 3 decades later. This is why Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, leader of the American Zionist movement, asked William Blackstone to reissue his memorial petition in 1916, believing it incorporated the principles upon which a just and humanitarian Jewish homeland movement could be founded. Brandeis believed that Blackstone's petition, antedating as it did Theodore Herzl's own participation in the Zionist movement, was destined to become of historical significance, and called Blackstone the true founder of Zionism. So we're just substantiating claims. There's more than one person that says that, and here you see that they're actually naming Brandeis. And my sources are all messed up right now. I didn't have time to organize them. So in the next couple of days, I'll reorganize that. We've got a ton of sources, but
Hell
just
yeah,
ran out
no
of
doubt.
time.
No
But
doubt at
you know,
all.
we're laying down the sources right here beside. So it's not like you have to even go search. They're right there.
Right.
So Stephen S. Weiss, one of Brandeis's inner corps lieutenants, communicated often with Blackstone on several matters concerning the Jew. Wise, the rabbi of the Free Synagogue in New York, was an original member and vice chairman of Brandeis's Provisional Executive Committee for General Zionist Affairs. So Stephen Weiss, one of the lieutenants we've talked about in part 1 and 2, here he is again, and he's communicating directly with Blackstone. So Brandeis, as the U.S. Supreme Court Justice, we talked about how he had to step away from his connections in a lot of places, especially his Zionist ones. Well, we see the same thing here. It's his lieutenants that are actually doing all the work, but he's definitely
Right.
steering everything from behind the scenes.
They
So
just use the
go ahead.
same patterns over and over again.
Yep. This is what I really want people to see. I'm just going to keep doing it. This is what's so important about this 10 weeks is you're really going to start to see it compound. We'll be able to
Yeah.
overlay the same pattern over all different aspects. And then you're going to really have a series of aha moments as we get close to the end.
It's like non-creative. And even though it's like all these creatives are being used and puppeted, they're ruled over by these non-creatives. That's what
Yeah,
it feels like to
exactly.
me.
They are coveting the intelligent creatives all day long. All of
Yeah.
these child proteges, because
Hmm.
if the government can coerce them, then they've got all the smarts too. There's a brain drain on our side, if you
Yeah.
know what I mean, right?
Absolutely.
So this is again why it's important to have the trivium. This is the education that they removed. So at the same time we're uncovering, the true history and exposing what they did, we also have to be infusing or inserting that knowledge that was missing. And if we want to entertain the thought of winning any arguments, right? They are
Hmm.
masters of the liberal arts. They know the magic of words. They're wordsmiths, as we
Right.
know.
Quite
So
literally.
if we want to win, we're going to have to, start reading the trivium, start understanding grammar, logic, rhetoric, being able to put sophisticated arguments together to defeat theirs, because we have the truth. They don't. So it's all about finding the right argument to
Bingo.
break theirs down.
And it's
So this is the one
usually
thing that should always give us so much confidence, Andy, is that we have the truth. They don't. They're coming from a place of weakness. We have strength. So we should never screw that up. We should never,
absolutely.
ever look like we aren't confident.
Yeah, and it usually is empirical evidence that they really don't want us having.
That's the primary source material.
Yep.
We're showing through their literature and through
It's
artifacts what really happened. I mean,
and
I didn't
they've
draw up
turned
that
everyone
President
off to
Harrison
it.
thing in the background.
No,
These are
of
things
course
that come
not.
off the internet.
And they've made everyone so opposed to even entertaining or that this is fascinating or interesting to learn about it all to begin with. They don't learn
Right.
their own history.
Yeah. Yeah.
They
So
go to the
here's actually,
experts.
yep. Here's a letter from Brandeis, May 22nd, 1916. My dear Mr. Blackstone, it starts. I am very
Jesus.
glad to know from your letter of the 15th of the memorial which you are preparing to present to President Wilson, reviving the memorial which you presented to President Harrison 25 years ago. That document, annotating as it did Theodore Herzl's own participation in the Zionist movement, is destined to become a historical significance. And I trust that you may be as successful in securing support for this new memorial as you were a quarter of a century ago. In view of the work being directly undertaken by the Jewish Zionist organization, your memorial would presumably be most effective if it derives its support from non-Jews. I hope you will keep me fully informed of the progress that you are making and will advise me in advance when you are purposing to present the memorial so that we may give such aid as may be possible in rendering it effective. Best wishes, very cordially yours, Louis D. Brandeis. So he's
Wow.
conspiring here just like he did with the Taylor Society, just like he did, in
Yep.
infiltrating the three branches of American government. Same way.
He's just right there whispering
Yep.
always.
Yeah, and nobody knows about this guy, but he is probably the primary author of everything that's going on.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to find anybody, more involved than Brandeis.
Yeah, no, it
Even
doesn't.
close,
I mean,
right?
Huxley's
Frankfurt is
pretty
close.
intense. Yeah, Norbert Wiener. Like we've talked
Yeah.
about a lot of interesting, influential people, but
Mhm.
we're kind of getting closer and closer to like the nerve center here.
Yes. I would say,
At least according to the late 1800s, early 20th century.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
crazy.
I would say I would use the term here high level grand strategist and
Mm,
on the level of Huxley, at least. Right. So these guys are behind the scenes. It's very similar to Huxley and how, he's the head of MK Ultra, yet they've got
mm.
Sidney Gottlieb as the face. And that's the only name that isn't
Evil
redacted.
scientist. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, the evil playing the evil mad scientist.
Yeah. And
Instead
they,
of the heroic 60s author.
and they put a lot of responsibility at the feet of Gottlieb, even though, he's not nearly as influential as Huxley. It's the same as they put all the guilt at the feet of Woodrow Wilson or, others throughout this, when
Right.
really they were the ones being controlled and steered.
It's unreal.
So Brandeis actually had Blackstone address the Zionist General Congress in Philadelphia in 1916. Blackstone spoke in front of 4,000 at the Metropolitan Opera House. Brandeis introduced Blackstone as the most important ally Zionism has outside of its own ranks. So
Wow.
he's got him speaking in front of people now. So William Blackstone made a central contribution to American evangelical Judocentrism by offering a nationalist adaptation of Darby's premillennial dispensationalism. Blackstone crafted a middle path between futurist and historicist prophecy interpretation. His efforts to shape political discourse generated a great deal of intra-Jewish debate.
Very
And
interesting.
so here's something, they gather a lot of information from us that's metadata and not specific, maybe. And here's a great example of us collecting metadata on them. For anybody that's wondering just how close Brandeis and Blackstone were, well, there's 47 pages of personal documents regarding Blackstone Memorial Petition in the Brandeis papers. Now, we can't get
Jesus.
access to those and we can't see exactly what they're saying to each other. Some of it we can, but the majority of it is behind a gate.
Hmm.
But
Of
47
course.
pages of communication says a lot.
Yeah, I'd say.
So today, Blackstone, like the rest of the dispensationalists, occupy an obscure area of history seldom considered. Blackstone helped found Biola University in Los Angeles and was its very first dean. Yet in 2013, during a commemoration of another Biola founder, Reuben A. Torrey, where a bronze plaque was presented upon which it stated Torrey and not Blackstone was the first dean of Biola. Blackstone seemingly erased from the history of the very university he helped found. As of 2015, they've named a student's residence after him. And on the website, they do finally acknowledge Blackstone's importance to the university as its first dean, but
Hmm.
they never changed that bronze plaque. So
Wow.
it states here, unfortunately, the plaque included the statement Biola's first dean. At the time, many old timers commented, that's not correct. William Blackstone was the first dean. Written communication subsequently corrected this error, but the bronze plaque remains unaltered. Thus, nearly everyone today is unaware that William Blackstone, not R.A. Torrey, was Biola's first dean. So he's in obscurity even there, which is
Yeah.
weird, right? Like they're trying to protect him.
Right.
And so more communication on the left-hand side. I invite people to go look and read. So that gets us through the dispensationalists. So that's one group of people that Brandeis, we've proven, is, deeply involved with.
Hmm.
So now we get into the social gospel movement. And
This is where it's going to get weird.
yeah, well, it's all underneath Christian fundamentalism. This is just another group of people creating this sort of same ideas. Now, we're looking at Walter Rauschenbusch there. So before I even get going, I want to say that his son, Paul Arthur Rauschenberg, married Louis Brandeis's daughter, Elizabeth.
Oh,
Okay. So think about that. They're both grandparents or both parents to, their children. So I don't know what that relation is. What would you call that? But they're very close. Obviously, they have, personal connections, and there's going to be some intimacy there just because their children are married.
right.
So it's important to know that as we go forward. This is the connection between Brandeis and the social gospel movement. So
Yeah,
the name
by
of Walter
blood, by
Rauschenbusch,
relations like this. Wow.
sorry,
No, just it's fascinating that this is how they're related, how it's related
yeah.
on
So it's
such a familial
familial.
level. Yeah.
Yeah. So the name of Walter Rauschenbusch is synonymous with the social gospel. He's considered the father of the social gospel movement. Okay.
Okay. All right.
So here's where we start to see the combination of socialism and Christianity, the Christian leaders. So think sociological evangelicalism. It's the scientific approach that's being used by the socialists. At the same time, they're using the exact same game plan. They're just approaching the religious.
Oh, wow.
So socialism offered not only a radical critique of American political and economic institutions, it also offered the seal, symbols, and sense of participation in a world transforming cause often associated with Christianity itself. I think I read that already. But that's showing that Christianity and socialism have a lot of parallels. Just like, British imperialism and colonialism all have similar parallels to Zionism and, other isms,
Right.
including corporatism, sort of global expansion, global dominance. It's all sort of similar parallels. This is why they could get along, because they had similar ends. They were just all disagreeing somewhat on the means.
Which is kind of perfect for the people running the show. That way, no one is ever too close. There's like a natural compartmentalization.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. This is key too. Compartmentalization. You see it all over the place.
Yeah, so none of these groups are really benefiting. It's
They're
whoever's
not really
behind
knowing.
them.
I don't think that
Yeah,
they understand the overall game plan because they're in a lot of ways empaths. They're compassionate people for what's happening. And
I
so
th-
we're talking about the noble lie and
mm,
the unattainable ideal, that mechanism, that tool to manipulate and persuade people to do their bidding.
it's something we see today. Quite
For
often.
sure. For sure.
People taken advantage
And
of by their own social cues and
yeah,
yeah,
and it
their own
wouldn't be
morals.
happening if we had learned from our history. It's just
Exactly.
impossible. It's like knowing logical fallacy. Now you know when you're being lied to, so it's impossible. So Walter Rauschenbusch was born in Rochester, New York, 1861, to Carl Augustus Heinrich Rauschenbusch and Carolyn Rump. Walter's father, a German Lutheran turned Baptist clergyman arriving in the US in 1846 after studying at Berlin and Bonn universities. Once arriving in New York, he entered the Baptist Communion, and in 1858 was head of the German department of the Rochester Theological Seminary, where he would remain for 30 years. So that's his dad. So following high school, Walter traveled to Germany with his father, where he studied for 4 years at an evangelical German prep school in Gütersloh and Berlin University, near where his father was born, not too far. So the same area. They go back with his dad. So you can see that there's some intent. The father wanted his son to go back and learn, but specifically from certain people and have the same background as him. So
Right.
they have to go back to Germany to learn for 4 years before he comes back.
Interesting
So
connection.
upon returning to the United States, Walter would follow his father to the Rochester Theological Seminary, where he gained a doctorate in divinity in 1886. Walter VI, in a succession of ministers, began his pastorate at the Second German Baptist Church in Hell's Kitchen in New York. And this is really where he starts to see the plight and the problems, the inequality, the social issue coming out of industrialization. Rauschenberg felt it the responsibility of the church to improve the deplorable urban conditions in the tenements brought on by industrialization, and along with several others, founded the entire social gospel movement through the creation of the Brotherhood of the Kingdom.
Interesting wording there.
Yes. So the social gospel movement was an outgrowth of Christian socialism. And Christian socialism, a new religion first put forth by utopian socialist Henri de Saint-Simon, to serve as an authority over the realm of industry and trade. So just like Brandeis is trying to solve the issues between capital and labor, so are the Christians. I mean, this is really the catalyst. This is where you see the dialectic. The industrial revolution is, the first step in this Hegelian, social reform.
Right.
And so the Brotherhood of the Kingdom movement, started by Rauschenbusch, representing to the Christian denominations what Walter Lippmann proposed to the secular as the Great Society. Christian socialism looking very much like the religious complement to progressivism. Brandeis' daughter Elizabeth married Rauschenbusch's son Paul in 1925.
Wow.
So August Heinrich, on the right-hand side, I included this little piece of information about Walter's dad. He was one of the earliest Baptist leaders in North America. He's like the second, maybe even the most, when you see the quote that I pulled out of there. No one man exerted a larger influence on the life of our churches than he did through his classroom preaching, newspaper writing, and books. That's Walter Rauschenbusch's dad.
God, this guy must have been terrifying.
So yeah, all of these guys have social standing of some sort, and they all come from basically that same area. Bohemia.
Mm-hmm.
So Rauschenbusch's own shortly lived periodical magazine, For the Right, was created in the interests of the working people. For the Right set out the Declaration of Principles for the Christian Socialist Society of New York City. So that's a branch of the greater Christian Socialist Society. They opened a branch in New York, and he's setting the Declaration of Principles. So Rauschenbusch's stated goal was to apply the ethical principles of Jesus Christ so that our industrial relationships may be humanized, our economic system may be moralized. We band together as Christian socialists.
Oh my God, this is so ridiculous.
Okay.
Like, there had to be people going, what does one have to do with the other? Get this the hell, like, what is happening?
Right.
Maybe not, though.
Well,
Maybe, like you said, maybe it is hindsight.
well, this is all right at the height of the progressive era, when
Yeah.
all of this, the social upheaval was at its worst. The tenements were at its worst. It's just
No one's going to
the
see this for
crime
what it
and
is.
yeah, all the poverty. So it inspired a lot of people to do things. And then, just like we're kind of okay with certain things during war times that we wouldn't be during peace times, this is exactly what it is. That,
Mm-hmm.
they're declaring war on poverty. And so underneath that, they can make all kinds of social reforms that, normally people wouldn't be happy with. But I wouldn't say that that's the whole thing. I would say,
No.
A lot of times people didn't know.
Yeah.
And
No,
then, of
exactly.
course, those that did know were squashed, just like we are today.
Right.
Their voices silenced because they owned the media by then. 1917, they had the newspapers all under their.
Oh yeah, you got to look back at the invention of the printing press and all that, and where print was coming from. It's always been in the hands of the few. It's always been in the hands of, who dominates.
Yeah. So I've got to just go for about a minute. I'll be right back. If you could just cover
Sure,
for
no
me, Andy.
problem.
Sorry to do that.
Yeah, no problem at all. Just want to catch up with the chat here. Hey, everybody. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. I hope we're digging this live thing. I think once this Rise of the Expert series is concluded, we'll either keep going with Dwayne on different topics here and there, or at least I think maybe sticking to going live once a week, probably Monday nights for now. at least. Who knows what may happen? But this has taken up most of my podcast energy right now. So I don't know how many other episodes will be coming out right now amidst this. Plus, uh, doing a lot of other stuff going on in life. But yeah, definitely want to do more lives. I want to get Shane back on here. I want to get more more topics back. You know, I've been talking mainly Box Saga or this. So, you know, there's a lot of other areas of history in between these two eras that need to be addressed, and I think there's a lot that can be said. But it's good to see everybody here. Appreciate you guys. I've got a lot more time on my hands right now because I recently got let go from my main job. So that's been sucking. So my new job is to find a new job. So anyway, I want to
Yeah,
do
so
more
everybody
of
support
this
Andy when you can, man.
for sure.
Um,
Yeah.
he's doing some great stuff here and allowing us to get this out there and make people aware of the true history. So
Hell
by
yeah,
all
man.
means, support. If you're inspired by this information, support Andy Rouse. Let's see if we can get it so he doesn't have to find that job. That would be beautiful. He
That
can
would
just
be
keep going.
intense. I want to do a lot more than just host a brilliant investigative journalist like yourself. I gotta put more effort into it for sure.
Well, in a lot of ways, this when I when I go back to the farm here in a month or so, this research is going to stop for about 6 months.
Word.
So, you know, that's really too bad. I wish I had somebody that could continue it or, be in a position where I could do both and continue this research throughout the year. We've been trying to get better at it, and we have, I think, been a little more prolific in getting stuff out, despite being really busy with the farm. But
Hmm.
I think this information is so important that we have to keep pushing. And so I got about a month left, and
Yeah.
we'll try to, close some of these open-ended researches so that we can come to some conclusions.
And I also feel that pressure, not to your level on the farm, but you know, we're gearing up now. My wife's getting all
Right.
her seeds in order and what we're planting
Yep.
and we're going a little bit simpler this year than we did the past few years, which is nice. We're going to streamline some more of our popular vegetables that we want to grow, you
Right.
know. But yeah, it's going to be just more shit on my plate, you know. So who
Right.
knows? Maybe some of my lives will be focused on the garden and focused on
Yeah.
farming and stuff like that. Who knows what the future will bring there? But yeah, we want to get back to what we're talking about here with the
Hmm.
social gospel.
Yeah. Um, so the Christian socialism that Rauschenbusch embraced stood aloof not only from Marxian doctrine, but also from any socialist party. We are concerned with principles, not with methods. We are evolutionists, not revolutionists. In this sense, we are socialists in the spirit rather than the letter. Now, I put that in there because it sounds a lot like when Walter Lippmann said, the adjective we like is new, whether
Right.
and progressive was the word that they wanted, whether it be Theodore Roosevelt's new nationalism or Woodrow Wilson's new freedom or the socialism of the syndicalists, right?
Right.
So
The
we're
new
seeing the same
socialism.
thing being said. They're just distancing themselves from the word socialism. And really, if you want to know what was behind, both of the Red Scares, this is what they were hiding. Because there was a Red Scare in 1917, just like there was in the 30s, that coincided with the war, and it was a distraction. Communism in many ways is just a front.
Hmm.
It's not even real. And what
No.
it allowed was the socialists to sneak in the back door as non-interventionists or pacifists. And this is really how the whole international order comes to be, by
Wow.
using nice sounding words. And now we see
As
where then,
always.
today we are at war there with NATO in this same exact place that we were then.
Jesus.
So,
Cycles.
and it's really perpetual. I've lived in a world of war my whole life. I'm 52.
Yeah, same here.
Really,
I'm
there's
only
been very few times
38.
that, there hasn't been all out war going on. So the motivation, this is from Rise of Social Gospel Within American Protestantism, page 117. The motivation for this distinctly religious movement was supplied chiefly by the ethical impulses flowing from a progressive theology. The key words there, ethical and progressive, because the ethical socialists are the Fabians.
Right.
And the progressives, we know who those are. Those guys are Louis Brandeis, the fathers of progressivism. So he's just
Mhm.
saying that they're coming together here, as we've already proven. So, of the many perplexing issues growing out of industrialism, those that concerned the relations of labor and capital and their interpretation by socialism so largely dominated the interests of socially minded clergymen in this decade that the social gospel may without question be described historically as the response of Protestantism to those specific situations. So, this is Protestantism um, trying to take responsibility or trying to fix the social ills,
Mm-hmm.
just like the socialists are, right? The muckrakers, we've introduced people a little bit to the muckrakers. These are all socialists.
Right.
You
They're
know,
all
Ida
gonna fix
Tarbell,
everything.
she's responsible for breaking up Standard Oil. Well, she was a socialist, and her other socialist friends created the American Magazine and then promoted all of this progressive and religious new religion and everything through those progressive magazines. Cosmopolitan, um, Collier's, Harper's Weekly. These are all progressive magazines. And so we see they're all in cahoots there too. They're all buddies. And just like they co opt Christianity, well, they're co opting news media
Right.
or literature or, um,
Popular
scholarly
media. Yeah.
work, the
Exactly.
intellectual aspect of society. You think of Carol Quigley and he talks about the 7 aspects of society. Well, intellectual is one of them, just as religion is, right? So they're just identifying the different aspects in which they need to reorient us, and then they're devising ways to appeal to each one in a different way, except the technique is exactly the same.
I like that word reorient. It really is
Yep,
exactly that. And it
because we're
reminds
both.
me of what we often talk about in Bach Saga talk. We talk about re-legion. I've mentioned that to you before as well. The a
Mhm,
little
mhm, mhm.
twisting of our the word religion, but a re-legioning, or as you're putting it, it really is just a reorientation of not only society but of the human mind, of consciousness.
Yeah,
It really government, the control of the mind.
yeah, and we talked about how government and cybernetics really have the
Boom.
same definition,
Yes.
right? Controlling society as if a helmsman on a ship. And
Right.
so the ship analogy works so well, whether you're talking law or, social engineering, because they wanted to remove us from our moorings. So our boat is anchored to things that we appreciated and valued. And so then at the same time, they understood that they had to, break us free from those things in order to then start steering the ship in the direction that they wanted.
Right.
So Francis Greenwood Peabody, that's a famous last name. I haven't made any connections, but I'm assuming 100% that he's connected to the famous Peabody family.
Mhm.
He's a professor of ethics and theology at Harvard from 1880 until his retirement in 1913. The Unitarian studied at Heidelberg and then Leipzig and Halle universities. So we're just showing that all of these guys get the same education. So Charles Richmond Henderson, Baptist minister, Bachelor of Arts, Master of Arts, Bachelor of Divinity. So 1892, he was asked by William Rainey Harper, president of University of Chicago, a devout Baptist himself, to join the newly formed Faculty of Social Science at the University of Chicago as a professor of sociology. So here we have a Baptist minister, but also a professor of sociology. So in a lot of the literature that we're going to show you, he's labeled as a sociologist, not a Baptist minister.
That is
Um,
interesting.
and
Two
there was one
very
more thing I was going to state here, but I can't remember it presently. Oh, and Chicago University was designed, they built the thing from the get-go to be the first Baptist university.
hmm,
So baptism is all over this.
wow.
So
It's
1892,
so
he was asked
weird
by
to
William,
see social sciences and religion coming together
right
like
now,
this.
Andy, we're preparing everybody for law. because
Yeah,
some of
dude.
these guys show up in the law uh, articles. Okay,
Mm,
this is an amazing coming together, but we got to just keep following it through these weeks. And as we get going, it's kind of like a fireworks show, man. As we
yeah,
get
dude.
closer, it's just going to be even more mind blowing on how this all came together. And I'm going to leave zero uh, argument as to the reality of all of these things.
Hell yeah.
Hopefully, through this 10-week program, because in my mind, I'm totally sure that these things have happened. I know that this is what's happened.
Well, and you're
So
showing it
yeah, I'm showing it
forensically,
and asking
literally.
people, prove me wrong.
Right.
I mean, what we're creating here and what we're showing is the most reasonable explanation to how we got here.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right?
if we're talking like what has occurred over the last 100 years
Yeah.
or more, 150 years, this is what's been going on.
Yeah.
And of course, it stretches way further back than that, you know?
We're talking social contract.
Yeah,
We're being
quite
mature and
literally.
sophisticated and going at this in a responsible way. We're not telling you aliens are coming from outer space or, not
No.
spreading Q-tartary or any of that stuff. We're going to the sources and, I'm not saying this is the end all and be all because nothing is entirely. But if we're talking human beings on planet Earth, primary source material and source material is the best way to go. And you should land as close as possible to the truth that way. But if we're going to let ourselves be steered by emotion and not really pay attention or take responsibility for where we pay attention, well, we can end up anywhere. And that's, a boat out in the storm. Imagine you get out there in the wrapped up in all of the emotions. It's like being out there in the middle of a storm. And what happens to a boat when that happens? If not
Destruction.
capsized, you're at the whim of the weather. You're at the whim of
Exactly.
the winds. So it's exactly the same. Analogous, but So
Beautifully said.
William Rainey Harper is the president of Chicago University, a devout Baptist himself. He asks Henderson to join the social science faculty. Okay, this is what they called it at first before sociology. It was just social science. Uh, and this is the first independent sociology department in the United States, founded the same year Henderson arrived by Albion Woodbury Small. And so we get to know him in episode 6 very well.
Okay.
So we leave it kind of there on him and just recognize that he's the father of sociology, or the founder of the first ever sociology department at a major American university.
Okay, that's key.
And he studied at Leipzig, Berlin, and Johns Hopkins. So Johns Hopkins, University of Chicago, those are the two key connections back to Prussia. That's really, when
Wow.
you look at
Holy
them, that's
shit.
what they are.
Hmm.
University of Chicago, directly from Prussia. Their logo or their symbol or their seal even says it on it.
Comes from, it's always going back to Prussia. Yeah.
Everything does so far. So Johns Hopkins is a place that they land coming back. And then he goes to Chicago University, like we say, forms the first sociological department. Henderson, a member of the American Economic Association and the American Academy of Political and Social Science. And so I mention those things because they just keep coming up. These people are, a lot of these men take a turn as being presidents of associations like the American Economic one.
Hmm.
And this goes to the inquiry. Once they start establishing this on an international level, it's the same thing. All these inquiry members are presidents of the American Economic Association or the American Statistical Association or the American Historical Association. So what is that but taking total control of the social sciences? If you know what the social
Bingo.
sciences are, that's what it is. It's like anthropology, history, economics, and that's what all of these professors are. And they become, the authority at the fountain and determines how much information goes out or if any at all. And they become the spokesperson for entire aspects of our lives in entire fields of study.
Again, this is the person, as we
Yeah.
call it in this series, the expert. This is, as you
Mhm.
were saying earlier, man, to me in the chat, that the expert is all over this stuff.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
everywhere because it's
So,
literally the control of how we perceive these topics
yep.
of reality.
Yep, that's a good way to say it, because you'd mentioned the last time that maybe we misnamed this series by calling it The Rise of the Expert. But as
But
you start
phew,
to see that this, yeah, this is exactly what it is. It's just being told through basically one man, because
right, yeah,
he's
but
so influential in it.
it's not just him, but it is, yeah, it's all these incredible characters.
Yeah. So William Rainey Harper, also a professor of Semitic languages at Yale in 1886. So he knows all about, the Semitic languages. So he would know
Mm,
the falseness of calling somebody an anti-Semite if they're critical of Israeli foreign policy.
right.
He's named Woolsey Professorship of Biblical Literature in 1889, and he's the principal of the Chautauqua College of Liberal Arts, and later he's the head of the entire Chautauqua movement. So anybody that's unfamiliar with Chautauqua, this is kind of like, it's a traveling outdoor education. I don't know. It's almost like a traveling circus, but they're teaching people Christian values along the way. Chautauqua movement, I was introduced when I was doing my research into the Pacific Palisades and the Exilitrator and
Mm,
the political salons up there. The first ever residents of Pacific Palisades, the hills northwest of Los Angeles, were
mm,
these people from the Chautauqua movement. And now the demographics have totally changed, and it's almost all exclusively Jewish um, owned homes in the Pacific Palisades. So just
interesting.
over 100 years, it's totally changed. So that's why I want to include that, because Chautauqua was also an important movement in all of this, just like the social gospel. It's just an aspect of Christian fundamentalism and the spreading of the word of God. But
Right.
here they're going out in a large group of people, bringing tents and tables and lecturers and ministers to help propagate the word of God,
Yeah, I'm watching an
like
HBO
missionaries almost.
series right now called the something gemstones, like the royal gemstones or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's about a fundamentalist Christian evangelical
Oh yeah,
family. And they're telling this story. I'm in like season 3 now, and it's kind of like watching The Sopranos, but instead of like organized crime, it's organized religion, and it's
yeah,
basically the same thing. It's pretty
right,
wild.
yeah. And so, in a lot of ways, we're asking people to just take a fresh perspective, take a new look at things, and here, it's very similar. To understand that socialism and Christianity are very, very similar was something new to me, but totally makes sense now.
Yeah.
You can see how they all know it and they all admit it. It's very obvious that they're working together.
Hmm.
So, uh, uh William Rainey Harper, he was a key member of the organizational committee that created the University of Chicago and was elected its first president. The American Baptist Education Society donated 400,000 to the university's founding, and John D. Rockefeller donated 600,000. The land was donated by Jekyll Island Club member Marshall Field.
Wow.
So that's just showing you that's not all John D. Rockefeller funded the creation of University of Chicago.
Hmm.
There was another major contributor, and that was the American Baptist Education Society.
Wow.
They're creating the first Baptist university. That's what the University of Chicago is still today. So Washington Gladden, he was a pastor of the First Congregational Church of Columbus, Ohio. He's a pragmatist. I don't have his picture here, but just wanted to include his name, Washington Gladden. Uh, William Newton Clark, also an ordained Baptist minister. He received a BA and a Bachelor of Divinity at Colgate Seminary. He lectured at Johns Hopkins, Harvard, Yale. He wrote an outline of Christian theology for the use of students in Hamilton Theological Seminary. So he's writing the textbooks there too,
Oh
which
my
was then
God.
published in 1898 by Charles Scribner's and Sons. In 1903, he wrote Huxley and Phillips Brooks. Now I went and tried to find, uh, you know, dive into that a little bit more, but I couldn't find it in time. But there he is. He's mentioning Huxley, and Huxley is actually mentioned in the Scofield Bible, strangely enough.
What?
And that's
What in
not
the
all this,
notes, right?
obviously, right? It's
Oh, okay.
Darwin's
His
bulldog,
brother. Mm, okay.
generation prior.
All
And
right.
Samuel Zane Batten. This guy's interesting. I haven't been able to
It's
delve
creepy
into him
looking.
too much, but look at the books he wrote: The New Citizenship and the New World Order.
Wow. I've
Established the
never heard of
Commission
this
on
guy.
Social Service of the American Baptist Association.
Dude, the New
So
World
you talk about
Order.
the development of the administrative state. Social services is a major part of that, right? And
Oh,
so
yeah.
here's another connection that we see. All of these guys are involved in, government social service or the creation of social services.
Holy shit.
And
Dude,
so
I've
that's
never
his
heard
book
this
in the
guy's name,
background.
Samuel Zane Batten. Never
Yeah.
once have I heard of this guy. And this dude
No, either
writes
had
a
I.
book called The New World Order.
Oh, I started laughing when I saw the names of his books. And so I put one in the background here, the New Citizenship, or yeah.
It
And
sounds
also
like
the
the
New
New
World Order
Freedom,
is here in
right?
the background.
Sounds like the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, it's the new everything, right? I think we found the word new in front of every important word to anybody interested in, maintaining their freedom to speak and, to think for
Right.
themselves. We see the word new put in front of all of those:
Mhm.
republic, nationalism, freedom, spirit, citizenship. Like it just
Right.
goes on and on. And I stated in one
Who
of my earliest articles that these are the men that put new in the New World Order.
absolutely. Yeah. And in New Testament, and I've said that
Right.
to you guys before, and it's
Yep.
so
Yep.
relevant here because
Exactly.
this is especially what we're
Right.
getting into here. Like, why do you think it's
That's
called
actually a
that?
very good point,
I'm
man.
so tired of people not realizing in this larger, grander community, probably not the people watching here, but it just in general, people that think that um, the Christianity that they've been handed is somehow saved from, like, untouched by the powers that be.
Mhm.
It's like, dude, these
Subverted by
stories are,
authority
yeah, man,
a long time ago.
absolutely. Every rebellion's been written except for this one.
Yeah,
Fuck
and
you guys. We're taking over.
I was going down to rallies here during COVID, and a lot of people were telling me that I had to get right with God or I was going to burn in hell. And I wish I would have known this information then, because I would have just said, "Hey, have you ever heard of dispensationalism? You ever heard of C.I.
Right.
Scofield?" Because here's where they, you know, co-opted your mind. If you're
Yeah,
going to
dude.
read literal, you know,
Like, I've spent so much time telling people that, like, their version of Jesus and their version of God comes directly from the church, and the church is corrupt as fuck, but, like, even worse than that, it comes from far less ancient things. It comes from
yes,
all of these motherfuckers.
and you can say modern. Hey, these changes come from modern times, and
Right.
that'll stop people in their tracks too. Just to know that this is, less than 100 years old, a lot of this.
Exactly.
So Thomas Nixon Carver, studying under Richard T. Ely and John Bates Clark at Johns Hopkins. Richard T. Ely is a very important guy to understand. He really sets economics up in America, and he teaches the next generation of people. He's really a huge figure in the progressive movement. I just haven't
Hmm.
been able to delve deep into him, but we've got some interesting stuff on him here. Uh, so him studying Carver studying under Ely and Clark makes him a disciple of Nies and the German Historical School. So Carver, the treasurer secretary of the American Economic Association. Ely, a world-renowned economist, founder and first secretary of the American Economic Association. So here we have the founder of the AEA, its first secretary, and then in the same group, we're seeing all kinds of people connected to that, members of the AEA. Ely also just happens to be the founder of the Christian Social Union and wrote extensively on organized labor movements. His father, a devout Presbyterian as well. Both Ely and Clark studying directly under Karl Nies at the University of Heidelberg. Ely also studying under Johann Caspar Bluntschli, the man who created one of the first codes of international law and
Oh,
war,
wow.
and is a co-founder of the Institute of International Law. Bluntschli, heavily influenced by Hegelian ethical social theory, we see popularized in both Germany and the United States today.
Wow. As soon as you see the word international, especially
Yeah,
international law, yeah,
right. Yeah, this
that's
is
it.
key to understand because they're moving us the whole the whole way that they got us to change was through the material force of arms and guns and tanks and blowing each other up was the problem. And then the people reacted, and the solution was international law
Hmm.
rather than a
It's always
material
the
force of arms.
internationalists, isn't it?
Yeah, and so that's actually what communism was a front for. When you really
Internationalism,
look at
yeah.
what was imposed, it wasn't communism that we should have been worried about. It was internationalism. And Karl Marx was at the first international and a key figure in shaping the ideologies coming out of there in the 1850s. So, and he's a journalist. So I would say that Marx, before he's a communist, is really an international journalist, and he's pushing this move towards an international governing body of all of society. So Professor Ely was perhaps the leading spirit in the group, found generous support for his new historical school of economics among the clergy, who, as we know, had joined the revolt against laissez-faire theory, in which attitude the association found its chief raison d'etre. So this is their whole purpose, was to revolt against laissez-faire theory. Now
Mm.
this supports my theory that it's not necessarily capitalism that we should throw out. I think here again we're getting a shifting of the goalposts,
Right.
because really they blamed laissez-faire for the the collapse in 1907 and then the Great Depression in the 20s. This is what they fingered as the problem. Meanwhile, organization was going on all over the place, and the monopolization and so larger and larger companies were being created, and we can see the result today. There's no ma and pa around. It's just big box like Home Depot, Staples, right? it
Hmm.
it really takes away the competition, and that was
And
what
when
they were attacking, was our
it's
ability to
interesting,
compete.
it's interesting too that whether you're religious or not, you can kind of see that that happens with churches too. Because I have small churches in my town, and then you have the mega churches all over the
Yep.
place. You have the stadiums, then you have the big
Yes.
mega churches. I've been to a couple. I had, well, I still have, evangelical relatives that live far away, and
Hmm.
I've been to one of their churches where it's very huge. There's stadium seating, and
Right.
it's very intense. I couldn't
And
do it
so
now. I was a much
hold
younger
that
man.
thought. Hold that thought too, Andy, because we're going to, substantiate what you just said here in a minute.
Okay, perfect.
So the expert, the social scientist in the middle, emerges in much of Henderson's work as the arbiter of social life. That's from Social Science History, Volume 34, Number 3, The Pragmatic Sociology and the Public Sphere, the case of Charles Richmond Henderson. So it's a biography or the story of his life.
Hmm.
And there he is, admitting the expert, the social scientist in the middle, emerging in much of Henderson's work as the arbiter of social life. Now, Henderson's a professor of sociology at Chicago U, but he's also an ordained Baptist minister,
Oh, how about that?
right? So there we go. He's introducing the scientific expert.
Unbelievable.
So he, Charles Richmond Henderson, closed Citizens in Industry with a note that churches, like the great trusts, were amalgamating, and that Protestant ecumenical was beginning to echo Roman Catholicism, which he called an international trust of religious forces. See that?
Holy shit. Oh my
So you're
God.
you're right
And
on.
he
You're
compared
picking that up
Catholicism
before.
to it too.
Yeah. So this is what they're doing.
uh,
They're creating a giant religious trust, just like
bingo.
they created trusts like Standard Oil, right?
Hmm.
Same thing, just
Wow.
in the religious aspect of our life, not you know business. So it's social policy. They start using these words: implies and assumes a certain philosophy of life and a certain religious faith, right? When we think about
Hmm.
social policy, we were talking about social contract. So what are they talking about here when they talk about a social policy implies and assumes a certain philosophy of life and a certain religious faith? Now let's take the religious faith aspect out of it and understand that as, zeal, or like how you can interpret evangelism two different
Yes.
ways. So social policy here, he's talking about our social contract.
Oh my
This
God.
faith proves its worth and reasonableness by its works. So here we are talking about our works. It is living and it is prophetic and creative. They're using the word living there. To us who believe in a progressive social policy, the word is not merely pushed forward by blind physical forces, it moves onward toward aims clearly set before the human will and realized gradually by concerted labors directed by science. This
Will and
policy
science.
is this policy is root and branch ethical. It is morality organized, vivified, guided by growing knowledge and inspired by faith. So they're using ethical there. That's a direct connection to the ethical socialists. So
That
that would
whole
be common
quote,
ground
man.
between the two,
That
right?
whole
That would be
quote
the
is
common
like,
ground.
yes, it's perfect.
Ethics.
It's yeah, the ethical standpoint. And it ties it all together.
Yep. So you can see some of the books on the right that Henderson has written too. Prison reform. He's actually the
Mm.
president of the American Prison Association or something. He's really running the show.
And we know where that leads. We know I've never done an episode on it personally, but we all know the connection between like prison and like the hip hop whole, corporate or like controlled narrative of hip hop and stuff like that, kind of keeping the prison cycle running and everything.
Yeah.
That whole thing is crazy if it's legit, I
Yeah.
can't
And
imagine it's not.
well, so this is great that we're showing that they're involved in prison reform,
Yeah.
because we're going to show you in the law episodes how Jeremy Bentham, the creator of the Panopticon, is really the source of a lot of the modern day philosophy of law. The predominant philosophy of law today is really based out of Bentham's combining utility and the greater good.
Hmm.
So
Wow.
that's as far as I want to go. But this is why I find that once we get to the law part, this is what I'm really excited about, because I think this is really where it's going to cement in people's minds just how much influence obviously law has in controlling society. It was something, again, that I didn't really think about, like the origins of some of these religious aspects that we thought were, thousands and thousands of years old aren't. It's the kind of same thing.
Yeah, it's like find every way possible to control human beings, and this is how
Yep.
they do it.
Well, that's changing images of man. That's what they were doing. That's what they've been doing the whole
Exactly.
time. Every aspect. They didn't care how ridiculous it sounded. This is like the men who stare at goats. They were trying to pass through walls just, by power of mind. And
Mm,
I don't think it ever happened. They said that it didn't. And I would, believe them there.
yeah,
But they would go into all kinds of different ways to control people, because they're social
they're
engineers.
psychopaths.
They're
Oh yeah, that
clinicians.
too.
They're bred. They were actually, they were brought into the fold because of their disinterestedness or their ability not to really have a lot of care. Because when you're making social reform like this, you can't be bogged down in emotion. And so this is where the greater good comes from. That,
Hmm.
yes, okay, some people may have a worse time here, but in general, the greater good is going to be served far better if we make these certain reforms, right?
Right.
So we see that today too, the greater good. I mean, COVID was all about the greater good.
Oh, absolutely.
And so in late 19th century America, the new science of sociology suddenly found itself the handmaiden and ready instrument of a somewhat distinct strain of ideas which begin religious and to an extent liberally progressive were acceptable to the entrenched powers of university governors and presidents. We're seeing the combination of sociology, progressivism, right,
Oh
into
yeah.
universities, and it's being accepted because of, you know, the um, the reasons for it.
Oh
So
yeah.
it is virtually impossible to extricate sociology and the social gospel in many instances. And to a large extent, sociology in America may be seen as an outgrowth of the social gospel. So they're almost synonymous with each other when we really start to get involved in understanding it. They're all basically the same thing.
That's crazy. I mean, considering how many like liberal-minded people are involved with sociology today? Like, can you
Right.
imagine
Oh, yeah.
how many of them even know where it all comes from?
Yep. And I would say,
How many of them know
even,
about the Scofield Bible?
when they talk about these guys as fathers back in like the early 1800s and even the 1700s, that's how they talk too. It's the
Really?
same language is being used.
Mm-hmm.
So the fellowships wide, this is not sure what they're talking about here. The kingdom, the brotherhood of the kingdom, maybe, or kingdom of the brotherhood. The fellowship's wide range of interests was well exemplified in the program for the conference of 1898, at which three series of papers were presented: the prophets of Israel as social leaders, the rural population and the social movement, trade unions in New York, the social work of the church, and a review of Sidney and Beatrice Webb's Industrial Democracy.
Ah,
Okay, so Brandeis is over here bringing industrial democracy into reality through scientific management, the establishment of minimum hours and minimum wage. And Walter Rauschenbusch and his people are studying the same book, Sidney and
yeah.
Beatrice Webb's Industrial Democracy. Sidney and Beatrice Webb, the founders of Fabianism, and actually Beatrice Webb, I was reading a book not too long ago here about Bentham, or you know uh, this ethical socialism, and they trace it back to David Hume, Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, and so those are three giants in philosophical history. But then they
Mm,
include, as the in the modern rendition, Beatrice Webb, not Sydney, but Beatrice Webb. So
interesting.
uh, again, she's an underappreciated historical figure. She's very influential.
Yeah, extremely.
She was talking and hanging out with Louis Brandeis before she even married Sydney as Beatrice Potter, and she's inspiring Louis Brandeis to make a lot of social changes. He's reading Industrial Democracy. He's reading the works of other Fabians and being deeply inspired by it. So, no aspect of the thought of social gospelers as a whole more effectively describes them as children of their age than does the word progressive. Applied first to advancing theological views, progressive later became a political catchword representative of a particular reform philosophy popularized by Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. That the kingdom should be progressively realized by evolution indicates the close relation of social gospel thought to the intellectual and social ideology of the time. So there we go. Right. That's Walter Rauschenbusch and the Brotherhood of the Kingdom. So they
Wow.
create this Brotherhood of the Kingdom. And really what I see there is it's like the promise of the utopian socialists. It's just a thing in the future. The future will be perfect, and this is how it's going to be. We're the technical scientific expert. We know what we're doing, right? Determinism combined
Yep.
with positivism. There's no time to ask any questions. The wheel continues to roll just like today. We don't have time to ask whether global warming is actually, valid. We just keep moving on, and more money comes out of our pockets to try to solve something that can never be solved. We're not even sure if it's real, right?
My
We
God.
used to
Yeah,
call it
yeah.
global warming. Now they've shifted it right over to climate change. And if you deny climate change, you deny climate. Now that's a major step, right? No, we just deny whether this is real, and taxing us more is going to solve it.
Yeah, or
But
or even simply that we have an impact on it, you know?
right,
That's the other part. They
either way,
weaponize truth too. They weaponize
sure.
truth to get us to throw the baby out with the bathwater
Yeah,
in so many different cases.
yeah.
So, yeah, this is unreal
So
how it's all coming together.
theology for the social gospel, Walter Rauschenbusch. So again, from Walter Rauschenbusch and the Brotherhood of the Kingdom, but by all odds, the most important writings by members of the Brotherhood were those of Walter Rauschenbusch, whose epochal book, Christianity and the Social Crisis, appearing in 1907, made its author at once the acknowledged leader of the American social Christianity and soon acquainted the Protestant world with the basic tenets for which the Brotherhood had long labored. So we're just making associations to socialism between socialism and Christianity, just
Hmm.
to show you that this is very well known what they're doing. There's no debate as to, the similarities between Christianity and socialism. They all knew it, and they just found ways to get along.
Yeah, and they're all talking to each other. They're
And
all
yeah,
together.
and they're all denying that they're socialists. This goes to the Inter-Allied conferences in 1918 too, when the credential card that was given to all the members that showed up there when the League of Nations was created in London 1918, before the Paris Peace Conference, credentials were being handed out at the door, and people were arriving thinking they were showing up at the Inter-Allied Labor Conferences, but their credentials said the Inter-Allied Labor and Socialist Conferences, and there was a big uproar over it. So this is how they just sneak it in there.
Yeah.
Like the Patriot Act, you wake up in the morning and you got way less rights than you did when you went to bed.
Right.
And it's all over a fictitious, possibly totally fabricated by our own leaders
Exactly.
that puts us there. And so they practice dialectics, the Hegelian telling of history. This is what they all really embrace.
It's unreal.
So Walter's son, Paul Arthur Rauschenbusch. So we're going to come to a conclusion here. We're going to show you where it is today. So
Okay.
Walter's son, Paul Arthur Rauschenbusch, he would marry Louis D. Brandeis' daughter Elizabeth in 1925, like we said, and boxes of correspondence between the three, Brandeis, his daughter, and Walter's son, Paul, at the Wisconsin Historical Society within the UW-Madison Digital Archives indicate quite clearly that the same interests in labor, social justice, and reform that stirred Louis in the first third of the 20th century also stirred his daughter and son-in-law. The husband and wife team of economists, best known for their work with Harold Groves, developing and securing the passage of Wisconsin's unemployment compensation legislation, the first such legislation in the nation.
Holy shit.
So here's a picture of
This is him grooming his daughter, and
for
then his daughter,
sure,
and
for
then his
sure.
daughter choosing a husband probably that was perfect
Yep.
for this. I don't know too much about it, but
Well, we know that they intermarry, right? When you look at, the Darwins and uh, the Wedgwoods and the Galtons,
mhm.
they've famously interbred between their families and they're marrying each other's cousins and all of these kinds of things. Well, this is exactly what's going on here. It's the same thing.
Aha.
They're
Yep.
bringing in the Rauschenbusch family, just like we talked earlier about the Brandeises being involved with the Goldmarks and the
Hmm.
Wiles. They're all, uh, associated to the Brandeis family. Well, same thing here with the Rauschenbusches. They enter the Brandeis family lineage.
Yeah, she
And
looks
so we see,
terrifying. She looks evil.
yeah, man, like
And there's that ring,
she looks
man. I
like
don't.
Margaret Mead. They all kind of look the same, these
Yeah.
ladies. I'm surprised she actually has a man because a lot of times these women that are involved in all of this social activism don't have babies and are single.
Right, because that's the model that they were going for.
Yep.
Oh
So
man.
Washington Post, we all know that that's totally CIA. It was created by the CIA to begin with. And so they're just doing a story on these two fantastic people that fell in love at the University of Wisconsin while they were trying to save the world.
I had to
So
laugh a couple years back when Washington Post was being censored on Twitter. Everyone was like, "Yeah, Washington Post is where it's at, telling the truth." Or no, am I fucking that up? Is
right.
it the New York Post? Someone correct me. I don't know,
Yeah, well, they do it all the
but
time.
it's the same thing. They're all fucking
Yep.
owned.
Yep. Yep. So a rich collection of communication exists in those archives between Paul and Felix Frankfurter, Tom Corcoran, and Thomas H. Eliot, and other federal officials that shows an important involvement within Franklin Delano Roosevelt's brain trust. Brandeis and Frankfurter most influential here again, consulting and advising U.S. presidents in the completion of much of the work started under Woodrow Wilson. So here's the
Wow.
second wave. I'm not sure if we've talked about how Felix Frankfurter, as the professor of law at Harvard, was taking the best and brightest of his students and sending them for their first clerk work under Brandeis and Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. And those guys turn into the major lawyers behind FDR's brain trust. So Tom Corcoran's involved there.
Hmm.
Dean Acheson might be another name that people are familiar with. They all are Harvard Law grad, Phi Beta Kappa 2, the next generation, and a lot of what they started under Woodrow Wilson, they finished in the three terms of FDR.
That's unreal.
So here's another guy, the
Meet our
Reverend Paul
presidents.
Brandeis Rauschenbusch. So he's taken the two S's out of his name, but he is directly related. He is the great grandson of Louis Brandeis. And where is he today?
Reverend.
The Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch is president and CEO of Alliance, an ordained Baptist
Interfaith.
minister. Reverend Rauschenbusch is a longtime leader in the interfaith movement, working to protect an inclusive vision of religious freedom for people of all faiths and none. As the great grandson of the first Jewish Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis and great grandson of Baptist theologian Walter Rauschenbusch, a key figure in the social gospel movement, Reverend Rauschenbusch's commitment to interfaith advocacy comes in part from his own interfaith background. So he's the president of an institution. He even looks kind of like Louis.
He does.
Yep, he's definitely got some of the lineage, his eyes and his jaw and his nose and everything. Yeah, it's very Louis. Hey, so
Yeah, yeah.
that
Well,
was
he's
very
got
interesting to me.
Louis's
That
daughter's smile too.
and so he's the Chautauqua Institute, the Center for American Progress, the New American Foundation, and the Aspen Institute. And
Jesus.
he's a he speaks on CNN, CBS, ABC, all the mainstream. Okay,
You know,
so there's where we've gotten to, and even their children are third generation lawyers doing the same thing. So
jeez, yeah.
this is why I say we are in an incredible place in history, because now we can see the lineage going back into the 1700s and 1600s, and then we can see, because we've got 100 years or over that of hindsight, we can see the generations that have come after Brandeis and the fathers of the progressive movement and all of this radical social reform. The reform we're seeing today is only bettered by the reform that we saw in this era, 1912 to 1920.
Oh, it's unreal. Yeah, you look at that era and you present this to people, and the thing is if anybody wants to refute it, they have to deny everything that's been happening for the past like 40, 50 years too. It's unreal when you look at society, our modern Western culture through this lens.
Mm-hmm.
Every single piece of it adds up. You can point,
Yep.
once you understand this material that you're presenting, most of the 20th and 21st century make a lot more sense to me.
Yeah.
A lot of concepts like controlled opposition and dialectics themselves make a lot more sense to me.
Yeah.
The
I would say,
counterculture's fuzziness to me, the control of it through CIA and other means and other avenues, it's all so nonlinear warfare.
mhm.
It
Yeah,
just all adds up.
that was, part of this research for me was just how amazingly it all clicked everything together for me. And then, over the years now, I've been able to just watch life unfold in front of me, and it's never failed to confirm my thoughts when I see, messages or narratives being passed through the mainstream. I mean, today, right now, people, you can internet search this. There is afoot a new Brandeis movement. So this
Really?
is all like, you know, like the World Economic Forum has its new generation of young leaders, and same with the
Yes.
Hegelians. There was young Hegelians, of which Marx was a member. We're seeing the same thing today, and they're called the Brandeisians, the new Brandeis movement. They're doing the same thing, social reform through, getting their toe into the sentimental door of liberalism,
Of
right?
course.
And so when we talk about liberalism, this is what they say about all of their fathers back in Germany learning, even when they were learning during the revolutions. It was a liberal education that they got. But
Hmm.
really what we're seeing is today's liberal is a progressive. We should definitely make sure that we're labeling them correct, because I prefer to think of liberalism in the definition of classic liberalism, a liberal, with its emphasis on freedom to speak and think and congregate and, you know,
Right. Progressives are not
pursuit of
that. It's move with
happiness. And
us. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off there, Dwayne.
no, it's okay. So,
Yeah. It's not progressive whatsoever. That's a very different definition than what
right,
progressive is.
exactly. And so I had somebody ask me about the US Constitution, and isn't it supposed to be a living document? Well, there are certain things in that document that are never supposed to change, including your ability to speak and think for yourself. That's why
Right.
that document was created. And I did reiterate to the viewer that, that was the game plan from the beginning. So,
When I was younger, there was no interest in learning American history. It wasn't taught in schools in any interesting way.
Right.
You'd have to really have a predisposition for it, but
Yep.
luckily I gained it later on. But one thing I do remember was that there was an open or a closed interpretation of the Constitution, and there were certain people fighting for and against that. I don't know any of the details. I only remember learning about that, and I think it was Hamilton and Aaron Burr that opposed one another on that topic. And I don't know much else, but I figured I'd throw that out there for anybody that possibly knows more than I do about this. That
And
I believe those two did a showdown in the street, did they
oh,
not?
okay,
Or
you're talking about Hamilton and Jefferson, I think.
maybe I am talking about
Now
Jefferson. Yeah,
that's a famous conflict of
right.
interests there. They both had different views of what America was supposed to look like in the future. This is the
Well,
alleged
yeah,
mainstream
and one of
account,
them was the Constitution has been written. This is what is meant by that, and that is that. And then the other, I mean, this is generalizing, but the other view was that no, 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 this evolves with time. And to
right?
me, that's always been the
Ooh, okay. So
the
that may
evil
be,
part of it.
are you saying
That
that, are you saying, Andy, that that is the source of their conflict between Hamilton
I
and Jefferson? It was that?
I don't know. I'm not a
That's
historian
very
by any
interesting.
means, but I mean, the fact
Makes
that we're
sense.
discussing this stuff right now, it
Mhm.
just brings that to mind. And I'm going to, of course, go look into it. I'm going to ask my dad about that too, because
Mhm.
he loves American history,
Yeah.
even though he doesn't accept my version of it most of the time,
Right.
But this point about open interpretation of the Constitution versus a closed,
Hmm.
that is such so just that method of argument
Hmm.
is so it's usual suspects, right? It's like exactly how they do things. It's this
Hmm.
negotiation of what the truth is rather
Hmm.
than plain truth. It's
Right.
always some sort of justification around it.
Yep.
And I don't know which person was on which side. Jefferson, I'm
Right.
assuming, was on more of a closed side, but I don't remember
Okay.
who was
So
who.
this actually goes back to the Federalist Papers too.
Okay.
And so this is one area of history that we really need to straighten out, because uh, all of these guys at the House of Truth and all of these progressives, they're Jeffersonian. They side with
Okay.
Jefferson,
I bet he
and
was
they
more
are the
open
ones
minded
that,
then.
right, but they draw out Mount Rushmore on the dining room table at the House of Truth. And who's on Mount Rushmore? This is important to understand. Jefferson's
Roosevelt.
there, not Hamilton.
Right. Yeah, dude. Holy shit.
And Theodore Roosevelt's there, and
Yeah,
Lincoln,
dude.
right?
Yeah, the
So
hero, quote unquote.
I think what I see when I look at Mount Rushmore now is an ode to progressivism.
Yeah. Well, now that you say
That
that.
train, there's an ominous continuity going through, before Lincoln even, but the emancipation of the slave, what is that? But progressivism and the manifest destiny. I say this all the time. This is exactly what it is.
Oh, yeah, you're right, dude. Now that I think about it, because I was trying to think of like excuses that mainstream academics give or would say for why those men were chosen for that mountain. And
Mhm.
it's like, oh, those excuses would just be aiding the underlying propaganda of what
Yep.
they're trying to put across anyway. So
Mhm.
it doesn't even matter what the academic version of it is, because the academic version is the stepping stone to get you to pay attention to these men and what they did in
Mhm.
particular to get
Exactly.
on them. You know what I mean? To help
Yep.
this progressive movement and
Yeah.
aiding in this progress of
Yep.
success. Yeah.
And it's just like the progressives, to put something up on the mountain and have the whole nation embrace it and honor it without knowing that they're actually just honoring progressivism. That is so progressive.
And let's also note that just as we see with Black Lives Matter and anything else these people touch, they do it on the backs of the people they claim to want to
Yep.
uphold and help.
Yep.
Considering that mountain that they carved those presidents' faces on is a highly contested situation when it comes to the native cultures that were living there and
Absolutely.
worshiping that mountain. That was like
Mm-hmm.
That's like the cherry on top for these people, I'm sure, was the
Right.
absolute disgrace of the natives that,
Yep.
not to go off on a totally different tear, but native cultures that remember an old way, a
Yep.
very, very old way that's connected to the enemy of our enemies, for
Right.
sure.
And the owner of House of Truth was the head of Indian Affairs under Taft.
Oh, of course, I'm sure he was helping
Right.
so much.
And
Oh my
Walter
God.
Lippmann, who's considered the father of modern journalism,
Journalism. Yep.
he coined the term neoliberalism in 1937 at the Walter Lippmann Colloquium, where he's hanging out with Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich von Hayek and all these economists. This is where they coined the term neoliberalism. So, they're the fathers of progressivism, but they're also coining all of these other crazy terms like Cold War, stereotype, you know,
Hmm. Oh, look at that.
manufacture of consent, right? So it's all
Yeah.
coming out of the House of Truth. And then Gutzen Borglum, the guy that creates Mount Rushmore, he is a House of Truth resident. He's hanging out there
No
with all these
shit.
guys. He's a super close friend with Roosevelt, and they're both high level Masons. And actually, Borglum is more influential in the Masonic circles than Roosevelt is. And he
Jesus.
helps bring over the 1913 Armory shows that starts this whole uh, degeneration program of American ethics and morals from another angle. That really sent shockwaves through America when they started bringing over all of these French artists that were painting radically um, groundbreaking paintings.
Right. Yeah.
So Gutzon Borglum is the head of that. He's really organizing that and which painters come over and which paintings come over. And so you can see that it creates a total disturbance in America.
Dude, this is so crazy. Like, we could literally take any point, like, just like that. It immediately made me think of David McGowan's work on the 60s and Laurel Canyon and
Yeah.
all the controlled op situations in hippie rock and stuff like that. It's just, you can literally take any of these starting point situations that we're discussing on this series and
Mhm.
just echo it out through history and
Yeah.
see all of the effects and all the different ops and all the different upgrades.
Hmm. Well,
It's
that's what's
just
so great
all
about
there.
this era. We're over 100 years, removed from it. So it's had its chance to really just stretch it to its furthest elaboration. So
Yeah.
this is why we have the internet, whereas people 50 years ago didn't. A lot of the literature wasn't even, available to people. So we are in this little window in the history of humanity where we have been graced with the necessary information to overthrow what's happening. It's just, do we get, a mass consensus? Do we get, you know, uh, do we get this kind of truth and this real history go viral and spread across America and people start to understand the real true history? Because if that happens, we flip this thing. That's how close we are. I think people need to understand that we have found the information necessary to wake people up. It's just now we need to put them in front of air. We need to make sure that everybody is, even those that you know a lot of what we know, we need them paying better attention. A lot of
Yeah.
times I'll see people sharing stuff about, Taylor Swift.
Or
And
the
I'm like, what are
Super
you
Bowl.
doing?
Yeah.
Why? You need to be focused on our lives and what we're doing. She's a manager of society. She's an influence leader. She's
Yeah.
created.
She's
This
a
is the
Brandeisian.
two form or two-step model, just like Oprah, just like, everybody else, Brad Pitt, all
Yeah.
of these
Social engineers, man.
entertainers that are asking you to fall for the argumentum ad verecundium or the argumentum ad auctoritatem. These are appeals to authority. So they're setting you up for a logical fallacy. So if they're not giving you evidence that a Big Mac is something really good to eat, I wouldn't eat it. They're just being funded. They're doing these things because they're getting paid a lot of money to do it. They're just totally
Absolutely.
compromised. So I cannot reiterate enough, and it can never be overstated that this information really is the key. The
I really
progressive era
do
is the new world
believe
order,
you.
man.
I
And when you
agree with
see
you
it,
completely.
when you
Yeah.
see it, you're just like, wow. And so this is why you and I really wanted to just put it down and get it down, however long it took to get it right. So it's going
Mm-hmm.
to be, a 10 probably plus, because this story needs to totally be unpacked. But this 10-part series is really going to give us a good foundation and an understanding. Man, if we can get a few thousand people to understand this in the way that I do, and the way that you do, and the way that a lot of people around us are, man,
Mm-hmm.
we can really just show people how it happened. And in some other, in less direct ways, we really let a lot of people off the hook, so that, a lot of the reason why normies, or, people have resistance towards this true history and call us conspiracy theorists, all of these things, you know, um, I lost my train of thought.
Well, you were saying how, they kind of have this negativity towards this entire
Right.
viewpoint.
So if you can show them a sophisticated way, and and just by showing them the history, even if they don't show it, and they're like, oh, that actually makes some sense, or, they lay their head on the pillow at night and think about it, and they're like, yeah, that does make a lot more sense than what these other conspiracy theorists are telling me. This is, and they can look at the sources. We're not
That's
making any of this up. This
that's
is why we're
where,
bulletproof, because we
yeah,
just get them to say it.
and that's why I really like working with you on this, because it relates in a way to my broader mission or viewpoint, if you will, which is
Hmm.
that, yeah, there's a fine line, there's like a little piece of truth within this alternative world, but man, there's so much bullshit thrown in the way, and I feel like my role here is to help facilitate that
Sure.
understanding.
Yeah.
Just that there's so much more nonsense than you think there is. Just as spiritual people tend to attribute a lot more ego to the higher self than they think they are. There's a lot more lies that have been perpetrated onto the truth community than the mainstream has perpetrated on the world at large. I think that is actually a very important and controversial subject and point that will probably get more attention in years to come, because
Right.
I no longer see the quote unquote conspiracy theorists or quote unquote alternative media movement being able to go around in a circle like it has for
Mhm.
60 years
Right.
anymore. We barely had actual alternative media until 20 years ago, 10 years
Right.
ago. So I have high hope that in time, this kind of information is going to be able to reach people that it will matter to.
Yeah.
People that do appreciate empirical facts and logic and reason, and won't be able to go through this information and continue to deny or
Yeah.
continue to prop up the false narratives that they've been taught.
Hmm.
Not to say that this is the most eye-opening podcast ever that but in a way, it kind of should be,
Hmm.
because this whole series is.
Hmm.
And I think I'll say this and we'll end it, that this series, episode to episode, is putting so much of my other episodes into context
Beautiful.
perfectly, if
That's
that makes
good.
any sense. And I'd hop
It
around to a
does.
lot of different topics, but it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter because it's all encapsulated under whatever the fuck this megalomaniac system that we are uncovering here
Yeah.
is. So I
Yeah.
really thank you for doing this with me on
Hmm.
my channel, and I
Oh yeah.
appreciate your work, dude.
Yeah. I wouldn't do it with anybody else, Andy.
Amen. Appreciate you, man.
Yep.
And
For sure,
thank you
man.
all for those who have been sticking with us and watching. We still have 13 people hanging on. I
Nice.
think that's more than last time hanging on at this
Okay.
this time.
Good. Good.
We had a good amount of people hanging out.
Yeah.
So we're getting it's getting out there, and I know that you are spreading the word far and wide and getting on
Yeah.
other podcasts about this stuff and garnering attention for the information you're putting out. So it's really important. I
Yeah.
appreciate
We had
that.
125 on the missing link, and they
That's
were there at
awesome.
the end of a 3.5 hour podcast. So it's not
That's
about me.
great.
It's not about you. It's about the
Nope.
information. That's how I look at this. Just like I farm to grow the vegetables to put it in front of people and then get out of the way, you know, that's the true role I think that the farmer should have. It's the same here with, forensic history. Show
Yes,
the
indeed.
sources, allow people to empower themselves. I do not want to be an authority over anybody for any reason. So we go find the information, we put it together in the way that makes sense to us, and then we present it, and then you guys tell us what you think. Now, if you agree and you come to the same conclusions as I would expect you would, then disseminate it, send it, start talking to people. This is a real great way to not be laughed at. These
Yeah.
conversations silence the opposition. Trust me. When you start talking sociological jurisprudence and scientific management, you know, ears
It's
peak up,
bulletproof.
and yeah, yep, and people that were ready to call you a conspiracy theorists, they can't really say that
No, they start
because you
wondering if
are
they
uncovering
know.
things.
They start wondering if their historical credibility is as good as they always thought it was.
Hmm.
I can't wait to
Yeah,
have some of these conversations with my father
right,
very carefully and
right.
happily with a
Yep.
drink in our hand or something.
Yeah. So next week, Andy, I think we're going to do Fabianism, but then the week after that is the two-parter. We'll see if we can get through both of those in the same week. I didn't set it up that way because it is a lot to talk about, a lot to take in.
And the two-parter is
So
the law, right?
is law, the
Okay.
philosophy of law is an incredibly eye-opening thing that up until now we've just been sort of bringing you along as in step by step, and then we're going to hit you with this sociological jurisprudence, and you're going to see the patterns through everything, and really what is going on. This is why we say social contract rather than invisible prison
Right.
or
Yeah,
the prison planet.
exactly.
I
Right.
say,
It's a contract. You agreed to it. You agree to it
yeah,
every day.
yeah, and it's the matrix too. This is what I see. When Morpheus talks
Ooh, I
about us
like that.
paying it, feeling it when we pay our taxes or when we go to work or when we look out our window. The Everything he says in that speech is about our social contract and things that Brandeis brought into our world.
Holy shit, man. This is beautiful. So next week we talk about, you said Fabians, and
Yep.
then we'll go
The
into
ethical
the
socialists. And then all of those guys come together in the law aspect, and then we go and show the international and how they created all of this on an international level.
this is unbelievable. And I really, I'm going to prop this series up, all year long at this
Yeah,
point. This is going to be a 10-week thing, but I'm going to
sure.
push it repeatedly because
It should be
it's,
on a playlist, eh? I'll put it
yeah,
on
I'll
my
probably,
YouTube
yeah,
feed.
I'm going to do the same thing. I'll probably
Yeah,
put it
we'll
on
just
its
make a
own
playlist.
playlist. Yeah.
People
I'll
like to
even,
binge watch, so we'll
yeah.
just we'll get it available for them in that way.
I want to make a whole page for it on my website, thedeepshare.com. And then I went there and I think I didn't pay my bill. So I don't
Yeah.
have, my website is not up right now, but
Oh shit.
I will definitely get it back up and running soon.
That's a good reason to donate to the Deep Share right
That's
there. Let's
right.
keep the
Donate.
website up
Yeah.
and running, people.
Whether you do it here or you do it through Red Circle, you can do it there too. Redcircle.com, which is my hosting site. It's where I put out the podcast. So you'll see
Cool.
this on the podcast feed tomorrow. But anyway, Dwayne,
Yep.
bulletproofpub.com.
11:30 back there.
Hell yeah, man. Time to go to sleep.
Yep.
But I appreciate you, man. And I
I
appreciate all
appreciate
this
you too.
work you're doing. Appreciate all the people listening and watching.
Yep. Thank you,
And
everybody.
yeah, spread the fucking word. And if you
Right on.
disagree or if you have something to question,
Yeah.
bring it to us. Bring it to Dwayne.
Hmm.
Bring it to me. I'll bring it to Dwayne. This is
I prefer that kind of stuff because
needs to
that's an
happen.
objection, but it's really just looking for more information. So I embrace those kinds of things when people come at me critically. Gives me an opportunity to explain myself. So
I think
anytime.
that's the whole point. This side of the argument will always answer questions.
We have the
Will
truth.
always, yeah, exactly. So it doesn't matter what the question needs to be.
That's right.
That's the whole confidence there that you can count on.
Yes.
So,
Yep.
all right, everybody, until next week.